The castle was unusually loud for October's end. Scarves were being knotted, permission slips double-checked, sweet shop money counted and recounted in eager fists. Even the portraits seemed to be in higher spirits. One near the Great Hall called out, "Have a butterbeer for me!" as a trio of Ravenclaws dashed down the stairs. Harry leaned on the banister overlooking the entrance hall, watching the crowd form around Filch. The caretaker squinted suspiciously at every name on the list, like he expected someone to sneak into Hogsmeade under Polyjuice. "You sure you'll be all right?" Ron asked, shifting awkwardly beside him. "Yeah," Harry said quickly. "It's just a village." Ron winced. "A really brilliant village?" Hermione nudged him sharply. "We'll bring you back something," she said gently. "Maybe some sugar quills or a fanged frisbee?" Harry offered a half smile. "Save your nuts." Ron made a face. "You're braver than I am." There wasn't much else to say. The crowd surged forward as Filch began waving students out through the main doors. Ron gave Harry a short wave before disappearing into the shuffle. Hermione lingered a second longer. "If you get bored, maybe visit Professor Lupin," she said. "He said you were welcome any time." Harry nodded. "Thanks." And then she too was gone. The doors boomed shut, and just like that, the castle fell oddly still. Harry knocked lightly on the door. There was a pause, then a warm voice. "Come in." Lupin looked up from a cluttered desk, half covered in parchment and what looked like a broken sneaker scope. A wool scarf was slung over the back of his chair, and a mug of something steamy sat beside a flickering candle. "Harry," he said, pleasantly surprised. "No Hogsmeade trip?" "Permission slip drama," Harry said, stepping inside. "Dursleys." "Ah," Lupin nodded. "The world's least magical people strike again." Harry cracked a small smile. Lupin gestured toward the chair opposite his. "Sit. You're just in time. I was about to test the theory that this tea is entirely made of bark." Harry sat, taking in the room. It smelled of dried herbs and rain-damp wool. Books cluttered every surface, some open, others bookmarked with scraps of paper or even sugar quill wrappers. "I was wondering," Harry began slowly, "if we could talk more about dementors. Maybe even how to defend against them?" Lupin's expression shifted, curious, then impressed. "I think that's a very good idea," he said. "I've been meaning to begin that with the class, but it may take a few private lessons first. The patronus charm is advanced magic." "I can handle it." Lupin studied him for a moment, and whatever he saw seemed to convince him. They walked down to the classroom where the boggart cabinet rested. Lupin's hand rested on the handle. "All right," Lupin said gently. "Let's walk through the steps again." Harry swallowed and nodded. "Think of a strong memory, say the incantation, expecto patronum." "Good," Lupin said. "But remember, it's not just the words. You have to feel the memory. Let it swell up inside you until it's the only thing you can hold on to." Harry took a deep breath. "I'm ready." "Very well. I'll release the boggart when you say so." Harry stared at the wardrobe. The silence stretched. "Now," Harry said quietly. Lupin flicked his wand and the door burst open. From the dark, a dementor erupted, its hooded form gliding over the stone floor, rotten hands reaching, air freezing around them. The scream came instantly. His mother's voice, high, desperate, terrified, and his body felt like it was full of cold water. His knees buckled. Harry tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. His wand dropped. The dementor loomed. "Ridiculous!" Lupin's voice cut through the room like a lightning bolt. The dementor exploded into silvery steam, then twisted, hiccuped, and popped into a giant balloon with bat wings. It deflated with a wet, farting noise and sank to the floor. Harry slumped against the wall, gasping. Sweat beaded at his brow. "I'm sorry," he muttered, frustrated. "Don't be," Lupin said, kneeling beside him. "Most adult wizards can't even face a boggart dementor. You did well to even stand your ground." Harry sat up slowly. "I want to try again." Lupin raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" Harry's jaw tightened. "Yes." "All right," Lupin said, rising. "What memory will you use?" Harry thought for a moment, then closed his eyes. "The first time I saw my parents. In the mirror. That Christmas night in first year. When I saw their faces for the first time." Lupin paused. His expression flickered. "That's a powerful memory," he said, softly. "Very well." Harry stood again. "Ready." Lupin gave a nod and released the boggart once more. The air dropped. The cold rushed in like a tide. The Dementor soared toward Harry, but this time Harry didn't let it swallow him. A blazing silver wisp burst from his wand, shaky, flickering, but real. It shot forward and slammed into the Dementor, which screeched in smoky outrage before twisting into a lump and collapsing into the wardrobe again. The door snapped shut. Silence returned. Harry stood there, panting, his wand still raised. A wide grin spread across Lupin's face. "Bravo, Harry! You did it!" "It wasn't much," Harry said, but there was wonder in his voice. "It was enough," Lupin said. "That was real magic." Harry lowered his wand slowly. "I think I actually felt warm in the middle of it. Just for a second." "Exactly the point," Lupin said. "You replace the darkness with something stronger." He waved his wand, conjuring 2 chairs and a kettle that immediately began heating on its own. He gestured for Harry to sit, then poured them each a mug of steaming tea. "I assume you thought of your parents?" "Dumbledore told me you saw your parents in the Mirror of Erised," Lupin asked gently. Harry nodded. "You're on the spot. First year. I sat there for hours." Lupin smiled faintly. "I'm not surprised. James would have done the same." There was a wistful light in his eyes now, like he was watching a memory of his own. "I met him on our first train ride to Hogwarts," Lupin said, voice softer. "We were 11. He had a smudge of chocolate on his chin and thought he was the cleverest boy in the world. He probably was, in some ways." Harry chuckled. "That sounds like Ron." James was bold, sometimes foolish, but always loyal. He'd have walked into fire for his friends. Often did, figuratively. You look just like him. Well, except your eyes and your temperament. You have your mother to thank for that." Harry tilted his head. "How so?" Lupin hesitated. "You're more thoughtful, more careful, I think. James always led with instinct. You lead with heart, much like your mother." There was a moment of silence. Then Harry asked, "Did Snape know my dad too?" Lupin's smile faded slightly. "Yes, they were in the same year." "Did they get along?" Lupin exhaled. "It's complicated." He sipped his tea, then added, "Let's just say they weren't the best of friends, nor were they the best of enemies. There was history, old rivalries, wounds that never fully healed. But why does he hate me for it?" "I think," Lupin said carefully, "he sees too much of the past when he looks at you, and not enough of the present. He's not always fair, but he's not without reason." Harry stared into his mug. "He said I was like my father, but not in a good way." Lupin's voice was calm. "Then perhaps it's time you show him the kind of man you really are." A long pause passed between them. The window glowed faint with the afternoon sun. Somewhere outside, A few students laughed, their voices echoing faintly up the stone walls. "I'd like to keep practicing the patronus," Harry said. "And I'll be here whenever you're ready," Lupin replied. They finished their tea in silence, one of those rare silences that felt full, not empty, a silence made of understanding. October had settled over the castle in full, painting the trees in blazing reds and golds, and breathing a steady chill through the drafty halls. Scarves had reappeared, breath steamed in the early mornings, and the air carried that crisp, smoky promise of winter not far behind. The staircase to the north tower wound upward like a coiled snake, and Harry and Ron trudged along it with the resigned air of two prisoners heading toward a particularly foggy cell. The trapdoor above creaked open with the scent of incense and must. Harry and Ron entered the classroom dragging their school bags. "I have to squint at another blank crystal ball. I'm transferring to Ilvermorny," Ron muttered. They walked to their seats and nearly jumped. Hermione was already there, seated cross-legged at one of the low tables, flipping through Unfogging the Future with an intense frown. She looked up as they entered, as if she'd just blinked into place. Ron blinked. "Were you behind us the whole time?" "I must have taken the quicker staircase," Hermione said lightly, though her hair was only slightly wind-blown, and she didn't look the least bit out of breath. Harry glanced at her, but didn't push it. Still, a strange feeling itched at the back of his mind, like she was not telling the whole truth. As class ended, Ron packed up their things, mumbling about how he'd rather polish broomsticks than polish his third eye. Harry lingered to tuck his book into his bag, when he felt a chill run down his spine. He turned. Professor Trelawney was standing inches behind him, her large eyes fixed entirely on his face, wide and unblinking. "As the 7th month dies," she whispered, voice like falling ash, "you were marked, not by prophecy alone, but by something watching, something waiting to finish the spell." Harry froze. Her gaze seemed to pierce straight through him, and then, just as quickly, it clouded over again. She blinked twice and gave a dreamy smile. "Ah, dear boy, did you glimpse anything in the mist?" "No," Harry muttered, backing away. "Nothing." He stepped quickly out of the room, face pale, heart racing. Ron jogged up beside him, slinging his bag over his shoulder. "What was that about?" Harry shook his head. "Nothing, just odd." Ron looked at him sideways. "You sure? You look like you saw something." Harry forced a shrug. "It's fine." They walked in silence for a moment. Then Ron tried. "Well, I was going to see if you wanted to hang out later. Play some chess, maybe." Harry hesitated. "Can't. I told Hermione I'd study with her tonight." Ron's face didn't quite fall, but the tight-lipped nod said more than his words. "Right, of course." He gave Harry a quick pat on the back. "You two have fun with your—" As Ron veered off down another hallway, Harry glanced back toward the tower behind them. "As the 7th month dies, you were marked." The words echoed through his skull. As the weeks passed by, the red and gold leaves fell down in lazy spirals outside the library windows. Inside the library, shafts of pale afternoon light sliced through dust-heavy air, illuminating floating moats and forgotten cobwebs in the rafters. Between tall shelves of crumbling tomes, Hermione flipped another page with quiet determination, while Harry scanned for anything remotely helpful about magical omens. Ron wandered by the table but didn't sit. "Busy," he muttered, holding up a book that looked suspiciously like it hadn't been opened. "Got a charms essay to punish." Harry nodded but caught the hesitation in Ron's eyes, the lingering glance of Hermione, the half-term like he might change his mind. Then he was gone. Harry watched him leave, guilt flickering through his chest. "I'll find him later," he promised himself. "We'll hang out, just Not now. Across from him, Hermione aimed her wand at a heavy encyclopedia and whispered, Wingardium Leviosa. The book shot up like a startled bird, smacked into the lovium ceiling and fell with a dull thud. Right onto Neville's head, one table over. Sorry, Hermione gasped, rushing over. Neville blinked through a daze, still clutching a book titled Brewing Brilliance, How to Not Fail Potions Again. "'S okay," he mumbled. "Happens a lot." Back at their table, Hermione frowned, rubbing her temples. "That's the third time this week my magic's gone haywire," she muttered. "It's like I'm too strong, but unfocused or tangled." "Think it's gonna fade?" Harry asked, voice low. "I hope so," she said, unsure. "I've looked through every index on soul binding, magical contamination, even wand feedback. Nothing. Either it's rare or it's undocumented." Harry didn't know which option was worse. "Anyway," Hermione said, pulling another book from the stack with more caution this time. "Back to what we can study." She flipped to a marked page. "This caught my attention. Echoes of the marked when prophecy lingers in the flesh." Harry leaned in. On the faded parchment was a hand-drawn woodcut of a constellation. It looked like a dog, but leaner, wilder. Its starry form stretched in a curled arc, one paw raised like a warning. Below it, runes translated loosely to, "When the shape of death stalks the sky, those whose fates were broken shall feel the fracture return." Hermione tilted her head. "The grim, but linked to prophecy?" she said softly. Harry stared. His spine tingled. The image seemed to shimmer for a second, like the stars were moving. He snapped the book shut. Hermione blinked. "You okay?" "I just don't like it," Harry said. "It's just a superstition." But even as he said it, something inside him whispered, "Then why does it keep following you?" The next day passed in a golden hush, as if the castle itself was holding its breath for the evening's festivities. The great hall transformed by nightfall. Thousands of floating pumpkins hovered overhead, casting a soft, flickering glow over the 4 long tables. Candles bobbed between them like fireflies caught mid-laughter, and the scent of roasted squash, cinnamon pastries, and caramel apples filled the air. Harry, despite everything weighing on his mind, felt lighter than he had in weeks. Maybe it was the warmth of the hall, or the way the laughter bounced between the high stone walls like a protective charm. Maybe it was just the simple comfort of being among friends. Fred and George were in rare form, passing around what they proudly called a chuckle ball toward the faculty table with a wink. It struck Dumbledore squarely in the shoulder. The chuckle ball spins once, pauses, and delivers in a wry, grandfather clock tone. Albus Dumbledore, voted most likely to smile while knowing 5 terrible secrets. The headmaster let out a surprised "ha-ho" before chuckling along with the students. Professor McGonagall raised her eyebrows over her goblet, lips tight. Until the chuckle ball arced again and hit her hat, the voice switches to something posh, crisp and eerily accurate. McGonagall detected probability of stern disapproval, 92%. Probability of hidden affection, sealed under faculty protocol. A dainty puff of laughter that made her eyes crinkle. 10 points from Gryffindor, she said with faux sternness, which only made the twins bow theatrically in their seats. Then the ball flew again, thwack, directly into Professor Snape's chest. This time, the chuckle ball pauses dramatically and delivers with bone-dry irony. Warning, entering sarcasm radius. Emotional warmth will degrade in 3, 2, 1. He didn't laugh, so the ball tries again. Your popularity is about the same as Slytherin's Quidditch skills, close to none. Snape didn't even blink. Instead, he slowly raised his goblet and took a very long sip as the ball bounced harmlessly off and rolled under the table. It struck him again less than a minute later. And again after that. Harry couldn't help it. He laughed with the rest, feeling for just a moment like everything was normal. Just a boy at school, surrounded by magic and mischief. Not omens, or grim-shaped constellations, or secrets waiting to turn. For a while. That night, the laughter still echoed faintly in the halls. The warmth of pumpkin pasties and clever jokes clung to the castle like the scent of cinnamon in the drapes. Fred and George had gone to bed champions, smug and triumphant, while the rest of the Gryffindor common room buzzed with a mellow sort of happiness. But sometime, in the deepest hours, long after the torches dimmed and the corridors turned to shadow, the mood fractured. It began with a shriek. Then came the rush of footsteps. The portraits along the 7th floor corridor woke rumbling in their frames. Suits of armour clanked as they turned toward motion. Peeves shot across the stairwell, yelling, "Intruder!" with glee, as if he'd summoned the chaos himself. In Gryffindor Tower, the fat lady was gone. Her portrait was torn, shredded like parchment in a storm. The canvas frame hung askew, claw marks ripped through the painted landscape. Students gathered behind the prefects, shivering in pyjamas, staring at the wreckage. "She wouldn't open up," said Sir Cadogan, clattering past on a wheezing pony, sword dragging behind him. "Told him to shove off, she did. Brave girl. He was furious. Went at her with claws." Professor McGonagall arrived, lips thin and white, and sent everyone back inside. Dumbledore followed moments later, eyes dark and grave. He didn't need to speak. His silence said enough. Harry, standing near the front, clenched his fists. He had a feeling, not proof, not yet, but a feeling that he knew who it was. The joy of the feast felt a lifetime away, and for the first time in weeks, Harry didn't feel like the hunted. He felt like bait. The Gryffindors had barely settled back into the common room before the portrait hole swung open again, not on its hinges, but magically, with no fat lady to admit entry. Professor McGonagall steps through, her tartan robe thrown hastily over a nightgown, her hair slightly askew in a way no one had ever seen before. She looked furious and rattled. The room hushed at once. "Everyone listen carefully," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a spell. "Remain seated. No one is to leave until further notice." A few first years clutched at each other. Even the older students straightened nervously. "There has been a security breach," McGonagall continued. "A dangerous individual has entered the castle. The fat lady's portrait was damaged in an attempt to gain entry, an attempt that, thanks to her, failed." Gasps rippled across the room. "Who was it?" asked Lavender Brown, her voice barely a whisper. McGonagall paused, then said plainly, "Sirius Black." A weight dropped into the silence. "He was seen near the 7th floor corridor. There is no indication that he reached the tower, that he came close. Far too close. You may have noticed increased dementor presence on the grounds. As of tonight, security will be doubled." She clasped her hands tightly in front of her. "You are all safe. Let me be clear about that. The staff is working with the ministry to investigate how this happened. But until we know more, no one is to walk the corridors alone. No late-night wanderings, no shortcuts, no exceptions." Her eyes landed briefly on Harry, but she didn't single him out. "Prefects will escort anyone needing to leave the dormitories. The portrait will be temporarily replaced, and a security rotation will be posted outside Gryffindor Tower at all times." She exhaled slowly and her tone softened. "Your safety is our highest priority. You have done nothing wrong, but vigilance is now essential. If you see anything unusual, report it immediately." She looked toward Percy, who nodded sharply and rose to gather the prefects. "Get some rest. Classes will continue as normal tomorrow, but any breach of curfew will result in immediate disciplinary action. She turned to Harry. As for you, Dumbledore would like a quick word. I'll accompany you when you're ready. With that, she turned and strode from the room to wait. For a long while, no one spoke. Then, slowly, quietly, the Gryffindors began to drift toward their dormitories, nerves prickling like static. Harry didn't move. Hermione sat beside him, frowning at the empty portrait hole. Ron stood awkwardly nearby, hand in his pockets. The break-in wasn't just a headline now. It was real. Sirius Black had been at their door. The fire in Dumbledore's office crackled low, casting flickers of gold across the shelves and instruments. Outside the tall windows, dawn broke cold and grey, mist curling around the distant treetops of the Forbidden Forest. Harry sat across from the headmaster, still in yesterday's robes, a blanket draped over his shoulders from the hospital wing. His hands were clenched in his lap. Dumbledore regarded him quietly for a moment, then folded his hands atop the desk. "Are you well enough to talk?" Harry nodded. "Yes, sir." "Good. I won't keep you long. I simply wanted to speak before the castle wakes." A pause. "I know what everyone's thinking," Harry said, trying to keep his voice steady. "He was trying to kill me." Dumbledore didn't answer right away. The silver instruments on the side table whirred and ticked softly. "It would seem," Dumbledore said finally, "that you were his destination." Harry swallowed. "But why now? Why here?" "That," Dumbledore said gently, "is what we do not yet know." There was a long silence. Then Dumbledore leaned back in his chair, his eyes grave. "The castle has been searched," he said. "Every corridor, every passage. We even consulted the portraits and ghosts. There was no sign of him after the incident with the fat lady." Harry's brow furrowed. "So, he got in, tried to break into Gryffindor Tower, and then just left?" "I believe," Dumbledore said slowly, "it was a hit and run, as Muggles say. He knew his time was limited. The fat lady's refusal to open up was an obstacle he had not counted on. It would have been foolish to remain in the castle after that." Harry looked away. "He was so close." "Yes," Dumbledore said quietly. "He was." It settled in Harry's chest like ice. He'd always known Sirius Black was dangerous, but now it was real. Claw marks on the portrait, the way McGonagall had looked last night, the absolute stillness of the common room. Dumbledore's voice cut gently through his thoughts. "You are safe here, Harry. That is not a hollow assurance. The wards protecting this castle are powerful, and they are not alone in their duty. I have stationed Professors McGonagall, Flitwick and Hagrid on rotating night patrols, and I have ordered the suits of armour to remain on heightened alert." Harry blinked. "The armour?" Dumbledore's eyes twinkled briefly. "You'd be surprised how loyal an enchanted knight can be, given purpose." That brought the ghost of a smile to Harry's face. "And the dementors?" he asked. Dumbledore's smile vanished. "They are less cooperative. The Ministry has agreed to limit their movement near the school itself, but it is a constant negotiation. I have made my displeasure known, firmly." He paused, then added, "I did not want them here in the first place, but the pressure to appear secure often outweighs the wisdom of actual safety." Harry looked up at him. "So what do I do now?" Dumbledore's gaze softened. "You go to class, you eat pumpkin pasties, you argue with your friends and try not to fall off your broom again. You live, Harry, as best you can. And if you feel the walls begin to press in, my door remains open." Harry nodded. "Thank you, sir." The spiral staircase turned slowly beneath his feet, and this time it didn't feel like it was taking him down into the same castle. The weeks following the break-in passed in a steady rhythm, like the gentle ticking of a well-wound clock. Fear faded slowly into routine, and routine gave way to laughter again. The fat lady returned to her portrait at last, still rattled, but sipping sherry with more enthusiasm than usual. Students began slipping jokes into conversation again, and Fred and George staged a grand reenactment of the Battle of Gryffindor Tower, featuring a mop in a wig and a suspicious amount of ketchup. Classes resumed with their usual flurry, and while security remained high, there was a sense, subtle but growing, that perhaps things might settle. But Professor Lupin didn't believe in complacency. The classroom was buzzing with quiet chatter as students filed in, shaking off the cold that clung to their cloaks. Frost rimmed the windows. Pale light spilled onto the desks, where small dueling mats had been unrolled. Professor Lupin stood at the front, robes a little more tattered than usual, but his face was alert and kind as always. A chalkboard behind him bore a single word, written in Lupin script: Fulgari. "Today," Lupin said, "we're going on the offensive." A ripple of excitement moved through the room. "You've all grown quite proficient with defensive magic. Protego, Rictus Sempra, even the Boggart lessons showed remarkable courage. But with the dementors, the recent break-in, and another Hogsmeade weekend coming up, I believe it's time we explore a new tool." He tapped the board with his wand. "Fulgari is a binding spell, less dangerous than stunning, but incredibly useful. Think of it as conjuring magical ropes from your wand that can immobilize your opponent." He demonstrated with a flick of his wand at a practice dummy. Ribbons of golden light burst forth, coiling around the dummy's arms and legs. It toppled stiffly to the floor like a trussed-up scarecrow. Non-lethal, effective, and can even be used mid-air if needed. There were impressed murmurs. "Pair up and practice the incantation. Fulgari," Lupin instructed. "Once you're comfortable, we'll begin a supervised duel, one pair against another." As students began pairing off, Harry instinctively turned to his right, past Ron, and found Hermione already looking his way. They moved together without a word. Ron blinked, then muttered, "Of course, expected as much," before heading toward Neville, who grinned and offered an eager thumbs up. After a few rounds of practice, Lupin clapped his hands. "Let's raise the stakes. Potter, Granger, you'll duel Weasley and Longbottom." There was a collective "ooh" from the back of the class. Even Malfoy looked mildly interested. Harry and Ron took their stances, nodding in friendly challenge. Hermione raised her wand, brow furrowed in focus. Neville looked mildly terrified. "Begin." The duel kicked off in a flurry of light. Harry's Fulgari missed Ron by inches, who countered with a well-timed Protego. Hermione conjured her spell cleanly, but Neville rolled to the side, and fired a harmless jinx that tickled Harry's ankles. "Nice one!" Ron shouted, only to be met with Hermione's wand flashing again. But this time something snapped. A sharp crack of magic rang through the room as her Fulgari spell amplified unexpectedly. Golden cords shot out like lightning, too fast, and slammed into Ron, wrapping around his torso with a loud thud. He hit the mat with an audible oomph, his wand spinning across the floor. Gasps and a few laughs erupted. Malfoy snorted. "Bit overkill, Granger?" Hermione turned bright red. Lupin looked both impressed and concerned. "Miss Granger, was that intentional?" "No," she stammered. "It surged. Again." Ron sat up, dazed, his hair fluffed like a startled cat. "Brilliant," he muttered, brushing off his robes. Hermione rushed over. "I'm so sorry. Again, I didn't mean." Ron waved her off with a half shrug, avoiding her gaze. "It's fine. Just caught me off guard." Harry helped him to his feet. Lupin watched them all closely, but said nothing yet. Back at their desks, Hermione leaned in. "Let me buy your Honeydukes order next weekend. All of it." Ron blinked. "Even the nougat?" Hermione gave him a firm look. He sighed, but smiled faintly. Deal. But I'm keeping the fizzing whizbees for myself. Hermione laughed, but Harry caught the tightness in Ron's voice. Something still lingered, awkward, unspoken. But for now, they moved on, and behind them Lupin scribbled something quietly in his notes. Saturday dawned crisp and golden, the kind of autumn morning where every tree looked like it had been dipped in flame. Leaves crunched beneath student boots as excitement buzzed through the great hall. Plans for butterbeer, joke shops and honeydukes traded like wizard cards over breakfast. Harry sat across from Ron and Hermione, stabbing absently at a lukewarm sausage. Ron was shoving toast into his mouth 2 slices at a time. I'm getting a barrel of fizzing whizbees, he said thickly, and if they're out, I'm hexing the barrels. You'll do no such thing, Hermione replied, rolling her eyes, but she was smiling. Scarf already looped twice around her neck. Harry tried to smile too, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. They left soon after, calling, "See you later," over their shoulders. He waved back, force and hollow. Then he sat in the common room. The fire crackled. Someone's cat coughed up a hairball near the armchairs. It was too much. With a sudden decision, Harry stood and turned toward the dormitory stairs. He grabbed his invisibility cloak from his trunk, his fingers moving before he'd fully made the choice, and made his way back down, adrenaline picking up behind his ribs like wind behind sails. But when he reached the bottom step, he stopped. Fred and George were still there. They stood near the portrait hole, whispering something over a rolled-up bit of parchment that looked more suspicious than a wand behind a wizard's ear. They looked up in unison as Harry approached, both raising identical eyebrows. Back so soon? Fred asked. George tilted his head. Did Granger finally hex Ron for his shopping list? Harry hesitated. I'm going. Fred blinked. Going? George blinked too, as in, out. They stared for a moment, then grinned like devils in matching Christmas jumpers. Blimey, Fred said. About time. Are you going solo, or? Invisible, Harry admitted, pulling the cloak slightly out of his robe pocket. Fred whistled. George looked between them and then dug into his coat pocket. You'll need more than a bit of fabric and bravado to get through the castle unseen, he said. You're in luck. We've got just the thing. He handed Harry the scroll they'd been whispering over. It was old, wrinkled, and clearly well used. Faint lines ran across it like veins. What is it? Harry asked, frowning. Fred tapped it with his wand and said, I solemnly swear that I am up to no good. The parchment glowed. Lines etched themselves across the surface like ink bleeding into silk. Names and footsteps appeared, moving dots, tiny script, secret stairwells. Harry's jaw dropped. It's a map, he breathed, of the castle. Every hallway, passage, and secret exit, George said proudly, created by a bunch of legends who knew how to sneak around. We nicked it first year, Fred added cheerfully. Been our partner in crime ever since. Harry traced a corridor on the parchment with his finger. This is incredible. But listen, Fred added, a little more serious now. It's brilliant, but not perfect. Some names pop up in odd places, George said. We once saw Newt Scamander wandering through the Hufflepuff common room. Fred nodded. Thought he was dead. Turns out he is, probably. The map just glitched. And there's this Peter Pettigrew name that floats around Gryffindor Tower now and then, George added casually. Always figured it was some alias Percy made for his secret love life. Or a ghost, stuck on loop, Fred offered. So, dead people can pop up on the map? Yeah, weird, right? George said. But we checked once, years ago. The only one there was Ron and his rat. So we labelled it as a mistake. Fred clapped Harry on the shoulder. Just don't take everything it shows as gospel. It's clever, but it was made by a bunch of mischievous teens. Like us. Well-meaning, but not exactly flawless. Harry nodded slowly, eyes on the map. The tiny names were drifting, dancing through corridors. The twins gave him directions to the statue of the one-eyed witch and grin. Try not to get caught. Under the cloak and guided by the soft blow of the marauder's map, Harry slipped through the one-eyed witch's passageway, the stone narrowing and damp beneath his shoes. He emerged behind Honeydukes just as the village revealed itself in full winter splendour. Rooftops blanketed in snow, warm golden lights flickering from shop windows, and the scent of roasted nuts and peppermint wafting through the air. Ducking into Honeydukes, Harry moved unseen past stacked shelves of chocolate frogs, fizzing whizbees, and towering displays of sugar quills, their wrappers glittering under warm amber lights. The shop buzzed with cheerful chatter, students marvelling at acid pops and trading jokes over blood-flavoured lollipops. Hidden beneath his invisibility cloak, Harry could have laughed aloud at the absurdity of it all. He was invisible in a candy shop. He plucked a few Bertie Botts every flavour beans from an open bin, tucked a peppermint toad into his pocket, and let the thick scent of treacle fudge carry him deeper into the shop. But then, as he passed the counter, he heard it. A low voice, clipped and careful, rising from beneath the floorboards near a trap door. He was seen again, just outside the castle grounds. Harry froze. Slowly, he turned toward the back wall, where the trap door to the cellar stood slightly ajar. He crept closer, his footsteps silent. A faint breeze stirred the hem of his cloak. The cellar was dark below, but voices, distinct and unmistakable, carried up through the shadows. Cornelius Fudge, Professor McGonagall, and Hagrid. Near the Whomping Willow, I'd wager, came Hagrid's gruff voice through the trapdoor beneath the floorboards. Could have been a fluke, could have been planned, but the timing gives me a bad feeling. Harry crept closer, the wood of the trapdoor cool under his hand. His heart thudded in his chest. He could hear everything, every word from just below. We can't afford to assume anything, Professor McGonagall said, voice clipped. This is no coincidence. First the break-in, now this sighting. Black is watching us. He's circling. He's always been clever, came Cornelius Fudge's voice, lower and more measured. Cunning, even then, but now he's desperate. Desperate enough to come after a child? McGonagall asked coldly. He's not just a child, Fudge replied. He's Harry Potter. Harry felt the blood drain from his face. You're saying, Hagrid began. Yes, said Fudge, there's no doubt. He's after the boy. A hush fell. For a moment only the soft creak of cellar wood and distant murmur of customers filled the void. Then Hagrid rumbled almost too softly to hear. But Harry's his godson. Harry blinked. McGonagall exhaled sharply. That's the tragedy, isn't it? James and Lily made him godfather, trusted him with their son's life. And he betrayed that trust, Fudge said flatly. Handed them over to you-know-who. Barely a day after the Fidelius charm was cast. Harry's legs wobbled. He gripped the edge of a nearby barrel for support. He was arrested the next morning, Fudge continued, his voice growing colder. Found laughing on a Muggle street, surrounded by wreckage and bodies, 12 people dead. All that remained of Peter Pettigrew was a few drops of blood and one finger. McGonagall's voice was tight. And now he's returned to finish what he started. The worst part, said Fudge, is that he never confessed. Not once. Not even in Azkaban. Not a word in 12 years. The dementors couldn't break him, McGonagall said. But Azkaban, that place changes a person. If there was anything human left in him, it's long gone. A pause, then Fudge added, "And now he's come back for the boy. Merlin help us all." Harry backed away from the trapdoor, his stomach twisted in knots. Sirius Black, his parents' best friend, his godfather, and the one who had betrayed them all. Harry's breath hitched, the cellar spinning. He didn't know whether to scream, cry, or run until his legs gave out. Instead, he pulled his cloak tighter and fled into the cold streets of Hogsmeade, the snow crunching beneath feet that suddenly felt far too small for the weight of the truth. The wind bit at Harry's cheeks as he stormed through the winding cobbled streets of Hogsmeade, his breath misting in the winter air, his cloak flapping with each stride. The snow crunched beneath him, muffling the heavy thud of his heart. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get away. From Honeydukes, from the truth, from the name Sirius Black. He followed the path past Zonko's, past the post office, past a gaggle of older students laughing over butterbeer. None of it registered, just white noise, just anger. He barely noticed when his feet began to climb, up, toward a hill at the edge of town where the land dropped off into a frost-dusted valley. The shrieking shack loomed in the distance, black and still against the silver hills. Harry stopped near the crest of the slope, panting, his fists clenched beneath the cloak. Then, a voice behind him. "Harry?" He froze. How did she? Hermione's voice came again, closer. "Harry, take off the cloak." He pulled the hood back slowly. Hermione was already striding toward him, her brow furrowed with worry. Ron stood a few paces behind, blinking in surprise. "How did you—" Harry began. Hermione hesitated. I just had a feeling." Harry didn't press. He couldn't. "Never mind," he said, his voice sharp with something between fury and despair. "You need to hear this." He told them everything, the trapdoor, the voices, the names. That Black was his godfather, that he betrayed his parents, that he was the reason they were dead, that he was coming for him. The words tumbled out, bitter and raw, and when he finished, the wind was the only sound. Hermione's face had gone pale. Ron looked as though he'd been hit in the gut. Harry turned back toward the shack, staring at its jagged silhouette. "He wants me," he said, voice low and trembling. "Fine. He can have me." He stepped forward a pace, fists clenched at his sides. "I'm not afraid of him. Let him come." Hermione reached out, gently grabbing his sleeve. "Harry," but he shook his head. "I'm done hiding. He took my parents. He ruined everything. And now he thinks he can come back and finish the job?" His breath hitched. He wasn't sure if it was rage or sorrow anymore. "I'll be ready." Ron moved closer, voice quiet. "Mate, you don't have to do this alone." Harry didn't respond. He just stood there at the edge of the hill, watching the place where the village faded into cold fog, where snow fell softly over the path he could no longer see. And somewhere deep inside him, something hardened. Not just fear, resolve. Then, something shifted. Across the valley, on the crest of a neighbouring hill, a figure appeared. A dog, large, black as soot, still as stone. Its head turned slowly, scanning the scene as though it had always known they would be here. For a long moment, it stared across the white expanse directly at Harry. Its eyes didn't glow, but somehow they pierced, measured, understood. Hermione followed his gaze. "Harry, is that—" Harry didn't answer. The dog lifted its head toward the wind, ears flicking, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the thinning mist, like a ghost dissolving into memory. Ron took a step forward. Was that the Grim? Harry's eyes didn't leave the hilltop, but his expression had changed. No fear, no chill, just something steady, cold, ready. Maybe. he said quietly. "But I don't think it's come to kill me." Hermione looked at him, puzzled. "Then what?" Harry inhaled deeply, the freezing air clearing his lungs, his thoughts. "Maybe it's a sign," he said, "that it's time." "Time for what?" Ron asked. Harry's grip tightened slightly on the cloak in his hands. "To stop running," he said, "and end this. For my parents, for all of it." The snow continued to fall in slow spirals, dusting the silence. And in the distance, the wind howled through the empty shack like a promise. As December deepened, and snow layered the grounds like icing on a massive stone cake, the castle halls filled with the scent of pine and spiced cider. Icicles glittered from the eaves of every window, and enchanted snow drifted gently in the great hall. Final assignments were wrapping up, and with them came unexpected surprises. Harry and Hermione handed in their completed Wolfsbane potion just before term break. To Harry's astonishment, Snape examined the vial, held it to the light, and after a long pause, offered a clipped, "Adequate." Shockingly. His eyes flicked to Hermione for a second longer than necessary, before turning to Harry with a scowl. "Granger, Potter, satisfactory work." It was the closest to praise he'd ever given them. Snape looked into Harry's eyes for a beat and moved on. Meanwhile, Ron and Neville handed in something that looked closer to sewage than serum. Snape barely gave it a glance before sneering, "Are you attempting to poison a werewolf or cure it?" He swept past, robes billowing, and Ron slumped forward at the table, mumbling something about bloody roots never steeping right. Harry caught the glance he gave their cauldron, half annoyed, half defeated. Care of magical creatures offered no escape. Hagrid, clearly stressed, barely spoke above a mumble most days. They spent the last few lessons observing lethargic flobberworms in frozen soil trays. Even Malfoy didn't bother with his usual jabs, too preoccupied whispering about his father's continued threats to bring a lawsuit. Defense against the dark arts, by contrast, had become a favourite for nearly everyone, even Malfoy, though he'd never admit it aloud. Lupin taught not just spells, but strategy. He turned each lesson into a puzzle. How to think like a dark creature might. How to prepare, not panic. They learned defensive theory, situational tactics, and new practical spells that gave him the confidence few classes ever inspired. And for Harry, the private lessons continued. Lupin had been pushing him harder, each session against the boggart dementor bringing him closer to full control. The cold still hit, but Harry could summon his patronus with growing clarity now. He didn't know what form it would take, not yet, but it was stronger, clearer, and Lupin, ever calm, gave him a quiet nod of approval each time the silvery mist held its shape a little longer. Christmas was coming, and with it something rare at Hogwarts: confidence. The castle in winter was like a forgotten storybook, pages of silence inked with frost. Most of the students had left on the Hogwarts Express, leaving only a handful behind to roam the corridors with unhurried steps and quiet thoughts. It was the third morning of the break when it happened. Harry was coming down the stairs from the dormitory, hair wet from a shower, shrugging into his jumper when he saw it. A neatly folded stack of black robes sitting on the couch near the fireplace. Beside them was a small note in Hermione's handwriting. No more cauldron sludge in the sleeves. Promise kept. Harry blinked, then reached for the robes. They were rich and thick, the fabric smoother than his old ones, which were still hanging limply by the fire after last week's potions mishap. These smelled faintly of lavender and parchment. Hermione glanced up from her book as he turned. "Oh good, you found them," she said, a little too casually. "You made these?" Harry asked, holding up the robes. They shimmered slightly at the cuffs. "I enchanted them," she said, tucking her hair behind her ear. "Self-cleaning charm on the hem, works on all known potion splashes, and a warming thread woven through the lining. Should help her in the walk to Hagrid's in the snow." Harry didn't know what to say at first. He opened his mouth, then shut it. Finally, he said quietly, "Thanks. These are brilliant." She smiled. "I figured you'd never buy new ones." He gave a dry huff. "You figured right." Ron came thumping down the stairs behind him, scarf already crooked around his neck. He looked at Harry, then at the new robes. "Blimey, fancy." "Enchanted," Hermione said, matter-of-factly. "Warming thread, stain resistance, the works." Ron grinned. "Can I get some for Christmas next year?" Hermione rolled her eyes, but there was a lightness between them all that hadn't been there in weeks, not since the fight after divination, not since the dueling mishap, maybe not since term started. Harry sat down beside the fire and pulled the robes tighter around him. Warmth bloomed immediately, like stepping into a memory. That feeling only lasted the morning. Nightfall returned the castle to its shadows. Harry had just drifted off, the warmth of Hermione's enchanted robe still fresh in his thoughts, when a scream tore through the dormitory.
"Yo, get off me!"
Harry bolted upright. The curtains around his bed were still drawn, but the shout had come from Ron. In a flash, he ripped them open. Ron was curled against the headboard, breath ragged, eyes wide with panic. Harry leapt down. "What happened?" Ron's voice came in gasps. "He was here! Black! He was standing over me! Harry, knife in his hand! It wasn't a dream! I saw him!" There was no one else in the room. No broken window, no sign of struggle. But Harry didn't hesitate. He threw on his jumper, grabbed his wand, and tugged Ron to his feet. "Come on, we're going to Dumbledore, now!" And they rushed through the common room. Harry paused only to whisper urgently to the nearest figure by the fire. "Hermione, get up! Something's happened!" She blinked, instantly alert, and grabbed her wand without a word. Together, the three tore through the corridors, robes flapping, slippered feet skidding on the stones. Harry wasn't just heading for safety. He was hoping, waiting, for Sirius to show his face again. But the halls were eerily silent. When they burst into Dumbledore's office, the headmaster was already rising, as if he'd known they were coming. His eyes narrowed at Ron's state, at the panic still etched across his face. Ron spoke first, hoarse and shaking. "He was in our dormitory. Sirius Black, I swear it." Dumbledore nodded once, calm but sharp. "Then we will take this seriously." He turned to McGonagall, who had appeared at the door moments later, robe over nightclothes, mouth set in a thin line. "Minerva, watch over them. No one leaves this office until I return." Dumbledore moved like a storm in still water, already issuing silent enchantments and protective wards as he vanished down the spiral stair. The night was chaos, in hushed tones and glinting wands. The castle was scoured from tower to dungeon, every passage and painting interrogated. Dumbledore searched the grounds himself, joined by Professors Flitwick and Hagrid in a rare and focused alliance. The fat lady had returned, tattered, tearful, and indignant. She confirmed the worst. Sirius had forced entry, though how he vanished again without a trace was still a mystery. By dawn, the Ministry had arrived in force. Auras combed the forest edge. Thestrals circled the ramparts. Dementors swarmed the outer boundary like wolves scenting blood. The lockdown was immediate. For the first time in years, students were relocated to sleep in the Great Hall, cots arranged row by row beneath the enchanted ceiling, which now showed a galaxy of stars. Harry, Ron, and Hermione lay side by side, barely speaking.
"I didn't imagine it,"
Ron whispered at one point. "He was there. He was grabbing me, almost pulling my sheets to look for something. But I can't imagine he was there for me." "I believe you," Harry said quietly, eyes open in the dark. He wasn't cold, not exactly, but something had changed. The danger wasn't an idea anymore. It had climbed the tower steps and stood over their beds. It had a name and a face Harry wishes to confront. For over a week, every meal and every whispered conversation took place under the enchanted ceiling. Sleeping cots lined the stone floor in neat rows, and the massive oak doors remained sealed shut by layers of enchantments. Scabbers, however, couldn't settle. He darted and twitched constantly, even when nestled in Ron's pocket. Crookshanks had to be confined elsewhere after yet another determined pounce, much to Ron's weary frustration. By the end of the break, when the castle and grounds were finally reopened, a collective breath of relief swept through the students, but Harry didn't share it. The Ministry, the Auras, even Dumbledore himself hadn't found Sirius Black. Not a trace, and that infuriated him. His enemy had been right there, and now he was gone. Again. That first night back in the dorms should have been a comfort, but peace proved elusive. Ron was given a dreamless sleep draft by Madame Pomfrey, his expressions slack with drugged calm. Neville muttered softly in his dreams, but Harry lay awake, the Marauder's map unfurled on his knees, wand tip glowing faintly. Harry couldn't take it. He grabbed his cloak, careful not to wake the others, and slipped silently into the corridor. He wasn't sure what he was hoping to find, maybe a name, a pattern, anything. Some proof he wasn't helpless. During his wander, Harry froze in his steps. Peter Pettigrew was moving fast along the same hall. Harry flicked his wand to the direction the map showed, but found nothing. He knew it was a glitch, like Fred and George said, but it was still odd. But he wasn't the only one wandering. Moments later, 2 booted feet appeared on the map, closing in fast. Snape. Harry turned a corner and froze as Snape stepped from the shadows, arms crossed and face lit with something between triumph and suspicion. "Out for a stroll, Potter?" he sneered. "Or were you chasing phantoms?" His eyes flicked down to the parchment. "Let's see what you're hiding." Snape snatched it. But instead of revealing anything useful, the map's surface shimmered and shifted, ink rearranging itself cruelly. Professor Severus Snape, an exceptionally greasy git who should keep his oversized nose out of other people's business. Snape's nostrils flared. "You insolent—" "Severus." Lupin's voice, calm and clipped, echoed from the end of the hall. He approached quickly, took one look at the scene, Snape fuming, Harry guilty, the parchment still glowing, and stepped between them. "I'll take it from here." Snape didn't move at first, then stalked off in a whirl of black robes, the corridor vibrating in his wake. In his office, the warmth of the fire did little to soften Lupin's mood. "You could have been killed, Harry," he said sharply, the usual gentleness gone. "What part of dangerous mass murderer have you not grasped?" Harry opened his mouth, faltered, then pulled the map from his cloak. Lupin grabbed it and put it on his desk. "I'll be keeping this until the end of term. You should know better." "The map doesn't work," Harry said, matter of fact. "It glitches sometimes, showing names of people I know to be dead. For example, I just saw Peter Pettigrew moments ago, so I wouldn't pay attention to it that much." Lupin blinked. "That's not possible," he said quietly. Harry didn't argue. He could see it in Lupin's face. Confusion, doubt, something guarded. "Guess I'm just seeing ghosts then," he muttered. But as he stepped into the hallway, heart still racing, Harry knew he wasn't wrong. That week, the castle had just started to thaw back into routine, at least until a sleek, lacquered box the size of a coffin was delivered straight to the Gryffindor table. It arrived during breakfast in the Great Hall, a long, polished wooden box, gleaming with brass hinges and a crisp label bearing only one name: Harry Potter. Conversation at the Gryffindor table halted as Harry opened it. Inside lay the most magnificent broom he'd ever seen.
Is that?
Dean breathed. "It is," Ron said in awe. "A firebolt! That's a firebolt, Harry!" The broom's handle was sleek black wood, flawless. The engraving on the shaft read Firebolt in sharp silver script. The footrest glinted like steel. There was no note, no card, just the broom. Harry stared at it in disbelief. "Who would send me this?" Hermione leaned in, eyes wide. It's beautiful, but there's no sender?" Harry shook his head. Ron's smile faltered. Hang on, that's a bit weird, isn't it? No name? It's just a gift, Hermione offered, glancing at Harry. Maybe from someone who saw your last match and wanted to cheer you up. That was brutal. No one sends this kind of thing without a reason. What if Sirius Black sent it? What if he jinxed it, enchanted it to throw you off during a match? Ron offered. Harry blinked. What? I'm just saying. Ron lowered his voice. You know whose #1 fan did break into the castle, and you think it's totally normal for someone to send you 1,000-gallon broom right now. Hermione's eyes narrowed. That's not how he'd do it. Why would a wanted man go strolling into quality Quidditch supplies to buy the most expensive broom on the market? He doesn't have to, Ron snapped. He could have pursed one and sent it. You want Harry flying on a broom that might try to throw him off? It's not pursed, Harry muttered. You don't know that. He's a lunatic, Harry, Ron snapped. You think that's off the table? He got into the castle, Hermione. Nearly murdered me in my sleep. Hermione placed a steady hand on Harry's broom. If someone wanted to hurt him, there are easier ways than sending him a top-tier racing broom. Besides, you didn't have a problem when he got the Nimbus in first year. That was different. Ron's voice rose. He didn't have a murderer after him. A hush fell at the Gryffindor table. Ron, Hermione began, eyes flashing. Ron's face flushed. Of course you'd take his side. Hermione recoiled slightly. Excuse me? You always do, Ron muttered, pushing back from the bench. You know what? I'm telling McGonagall, Ron said suddenly, standing. Let her decide if it's safe. Hermione looked stunned. You'd really go behind our backs? I'm trying to keep him alive, Hermione. Ron turned and stormed off. He marched off toward the staff table without another word. Hermione stared after him, face blank with tension. Harry grit his teeth. Moments later, Professor McGonagall approached, eyes sharp and tight. I've just been informed, she said, gaze flicking between the broom and Harry, that you received an anonymous gift of highly suspect origin. It's just a broom, Harry said, jaw clenched, probably from someone who supports Gryffindor. An anonymous broom, she interrupted, delivered without oversight, with no return sender, during a time when someone is trying to kill you. Harry's voice lowered. It's a firebolt. Precisely, McGonagall nodded grimly. Too powerful to risk. I'm confiscating it for inspection. The moment I'm satisfied it's safe, you'll have it back. But this is not up for discussion, Mr. Potter. She summoned the broom with a wave of her wand and strode off with it like a general marching into battle. Harry stood there, fists curled, staring after her. He didn't speak, just turned and walked briskly from the hall. Hermione followed. Ron stayed behind. Snow still laced the grounds in brittle white patches, and the lake had turned a dull slate under the overcast sky. Harry and Hermione crunched their way toward Hagrid's cabin, their cloaks drawn tight against the chill. Neither of them had spoken much since leaving the Great Hall. The firebolt was gone, so was Ron. Hagrid opened the door with a puzzled blink, then gave them both a warm, if weary grin. Well, if it ain't the brains in the broomstick, he said, ushering them in. Tea? They nodded, settling near the hearth where Fang was already snoring, belly rising and falling like a drawn curtain. The fire crackled softly, casting amber flickers across the wooden walls. Well now, what's got you looking like someone jinxed your tea? Hagrid said, ushering them inside. You're right, Harry. Harry hesitated. It's been a morning. Hagrid poured them both tea in the mismatched mugs he always used. Go on then, he said, setting the kettle down with a thump. Spit it out. Harry finally looked up. Ron told McGonagall about the firebolt. She took it. Hagrid blinked. Firebolt? Hermione nodded. Someone sent Harry a brand new one. No note, no card, just the broom. Hagrid's eyes went wide. A firebolt? Blimey, that's the fastest broomstick ever made. Who? We don't know, Harry said. That's why she took it. Hagrid scratched at his beard. Can't blame her for being cautious, not with Black still running about. Still, what a thing to lose. Hermione sat quietly, fingers curled around her mug. He thinks he's protecting you, Harry snorted, by getting my broom confiscated. Hagrid sighed, settling into his armchair with a creak that made Fang snuffle in protest. You can't blame him, Harry. The lad's scared. We all are in our own way. Doesn't mean he's right. But it don't mean he's your enemy either. Silence settled for a moment, save for the pop of the fire. But enough about that, Hagrid added, glancing toward the window, where pale sunlight bled through the frost. There's been worse news this week. Hermione looked up sharply. What do you mean? Hagrid hesitated. Then he reached under the table and pulled out a scroll of parchment, creased and damp at the corners. Got word yesterday. Buckbeak's hearing came through. Harry leaned forward. And? They've sentenced him, Hagrid said heavily. Execution. Hermione gasped. Harry sat back in his chair, thunderstruck. No, what? Why? Said he's too dangerous. Malfoy's fathers pushed the whole thing through the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures. I've appealed, but... His voice cracked. It don't look good. Fang whimpered in his sleep. Hermione's hand flew to her mouth. But Buckbeak didn't do anything wrong. Draco provoked him. I know that. You know that, but Lucius Malfoy don't care. He wants to make a point. And the committee's more afraid of him than they are interested in justice. Harry felt something dark stir in his chest. Everything lately seemed to be a slow loss. Trust, safety, friendship, now even innocent creatures. We'll help, Hermione said fiercely. We'll go through every book in the library. We'll find a defence for him. Hagrid smiled sadly. Thank you, both of you, but don't get your hopes up too high. Outside, snow drifted from the trees like ash, and Harry sat still, holding his tea, thinking not of broomsticks or Ron, but of a hippogriff with calm grey eyes and bound wings. Everything was unravelling, but maybe, just maybe, there was still time to stitch it back together. That week, the library became a second home for Harry and Hermione. Every afternoon, after classes and dinner, they tucked themselves away between towering stacks of magical lore volumes and dusty records of past hearings. The notes they compiled for Hagrid were organised meticulously, Hermione's parchment brimming with references to precedent cases and magical creature rights, while Harry added simplified summaries and scribbled arguments in the margins for Hagrid to actually use. One grey afternoon, Harry lingered by the entrance, watching flakes of snow drift lazily past the high windows. His thoughts wandered, half on Buckbeak, half on Ron, and maybe a little on the firebolt locked away in McGonagall's office. Honestly. Don't stand there like a gargoyle, came a voice behind him. Harry jumped. Hermione had appeared out of nowhere. How did you... he started. She breezed past him into the library. No time. We still haven't finished compiling the committee's appeal guidelines. Harry followed, frowning. But you weren't... Harry, she said, cutting him off as she unrolled their shared notes. Do you want Buckbeak to have a chance or not? He let it go. For now. They worked in a quiet corner, parchment spread between them, the firelight flickering against the spines of 100 silent books. Quills scratched. Occasionally, Hermione muttered legal phrases to herself, while Harry frowned at a particularly long-winded precedent about a rogue manticore. Then, out of nowhere, Hermione set her quill down. You know, she began, still not quite looking at him, about the firebolt. Ron was... well, he wasn't wrong about getting it checked. Harry's shoulders tensed, but he didn't interrupt. I mean, yes, the way he went about it was awful, and it wasn't fair to you. But we did get a cursed diary last year, and the broom had no note. It could have been... Yeah, Harry muttered. I get it, I do. Doesn't mean I have to like it. Hermione offered a small nod. No, you don't. Harry leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. We haven't really talked to him all week. No, she said. But maybe it's time we did. Harry sighed, glancing at the notes between them. He didn't mean to betray us. He thought he was protecting me. Hermione smiled faintly. That's kind of his thing, isn't it? Being brash and stubborn and sometimes accidentally right. Harry chuckled under his breath. Yeah, they packed up their notes in silence, the tension softening into something quieter. Outside, the snow kept falling, and the castle hummed in its usual winter stillness. Tomorrow, they'd find Ron, and maybe stitch together what had come undone. They found Ron in the common room, pacing in front of the fireplace, muttering under his breath and yanking cushions off the armchairs.
Scabbers,
he called, half pleading, half panicked. Come on, where are you? Hermione hesitated at the bottom of the stairs. Ron? Did something happen? Ron spun around, red-faced and wild-eyed. He's gone again. Vanished. And don't you dare say it's because of me leaving crumbs in my trunk. Hermione opened her mouth, but Ron barreled on. He's not just hiding. I've looked everywhere for a week, and he's gone. And I know why. His eyes locked on Hermione. It's that bloody cat of yours. Hermione's face paled. Excuse me? Don't act surprised, Ron shouted. He's been stalking him for months. You think I don't notice him slinking around when Scabbers is out? He's obsessed. Ron, that's completely unfair, Hermione shot back, her voice tight with insult. Crookshanks has been locked up in my dorm for the past 3 days. Oh yeah? Maybe he got out. Maybe he found a way. He's clever, isn't he? Ron's voice was thick with sarcasm. You're always going on about how clever he is. Hermione's eyes blazed. So now, I'm to blame for your rat disappearing. He didn't just disappear. He's dead. Or eaten. And your cat's probably purring over the bones. Harry stood stiffly beside them, watching the words spiral out of control. He hadn't planned to say anything, still bitter over the firebolt. But the accusation hanging in the air made something snap. She's not wrong, Harry said, voice sharp. Crookshanks didn't do anything, and even if he did get out, which he didn't, you've got no proof. Ron's face flushed deeper. Right, of course you're with her. Figures. You two have been thick as thieves since you got that broom. Harry stepped forward. You mean the broom you got taken away? I was trying to protect you, mate. It's the way you did it that pissed me off, Harry snapped. You went and told a teacher before I could even get an argument out. Because you're too stubborn to think things through. You charge into everything like you've got something to prove. Harry's fists clenched. You think I want any of this. You think I like being chased year after year by maniacs. You don't know what it's like, Ron. Oh, please, Ron sneered. Poor Harry Potter, always the centre of everything. Sorry you've got friends who care whether you live or die. Friends? Harry said, eyes flashing. You're not acting like one. The room had gone still. A few second years by the window pretended to read, wide-eyed. Ron's jaw worked. He looked like he wanted to say more, but instead he shoved past them, muttering something under his breath as he stormed toward the boys' staircase. The silence left behind was raw and heavy. Hermione stood frozen for a moment, then quietly said, Come on, Harry. He followed her toward the portrait hole without a word. Whatever hope there had been of fixing things, it had just fallen apart. The weeks that followed were a blur of frost-bitten mornings and restless nights. February settled over Hogwarts like a wet wool blanket, cold, heavy, and lingering longer than welcome. Snow gave way to slush. Scarves began to loosen, though the chill clung to the stones of the castle like breaths on a mirror. Inside, things weren't much warmer. The trio remained fractured, each moving like a lone piece on a chessboard. Ron throwing himself into gobstones and late-night chess games with Seamus. Hermione buried in Buckbeak's appeal and exams, and Harry caught somewhere in between, half resentful, half regretful, entirely exhausted. He barely remembered signing up for the make-up divination session. The timetable said Thursday after dinner, and he climbed the North Tower stairs that evening with leaden steps, his bag dragging behind him like an afterthought. The classroom was dim, just one or two oil lamps flickering beside incense burners. Trelawney hovered like mist behind a stack of teacups, her shawl beaded with candlelight. "Ah, dear boy," she intoned softly, as though he were both expected and unexpected. "Sit, sit. The stars whispered your name." Harry sat. They read tea leaves. She asked about his dreams. It was all as airy as ever, but just as he rose to leave, one hand on the beaded curtain, her voice dropped an octave, as though another current passed through her. She froze. The teacup in her hand trembled, and then, in a voice that didn't quite sound like hers, "When the soul's shadow sheds its skin, the betrayer will rise again, and the fallen will awaken the hunted." Harry turned slowly. Trelawney's eyes had rolled back, lids fluttering as though caught in a storm. He stood still as stone. Then, as quickly as it began, it ended. Her head lolled forward, then snapped upright. She blinked at him, startled. "Oh, were you just leaving, dear?" she asked, as if nothing had happened. Harry muttered something and left quickly, footsteps echoing hollowly down the stairs. Later, in the common room, Harry filled Hermione in. "I'm telling you," Harry said, pacing in front of the fireplace while Hermione watched from a squashy armchair. "She wasn't faking, not this time." Hermione sighed, shutting her book but leaving one finger between the pages. "Harry, she's made 50 prophecies this term. One of them was about Neville sneezing frogs. This wasn't like that. She didn't even remember saying it." "What exactly did she say?" He repeated the words, Hermione's brow furrowed but only briefly. "Honestly, it just sounds like ominous nonsense. Shadow shedding skin, fallen awakening the hunted. It's cryptic on purpose. That's how she keeps her job." Harry didn't argue further, but he didn't sleep well that night either, because as ridiculous as it sounded, something about those words clung to him, like smoke after a fire. The desks had been rearranged in pairs again, but Ron and Neville sat far from where Harry and Hermione usually did. Hermione barely looked over, Ron didn't look at all. Neville offered a sheepish smile when Harry caught his eye, but it vanished quickly. Lupin noticed. He didn't say anything at first. The lesson carried on, a review of defensive hexes and counter-charms, group demonstrations, a bit of laughter when Seamus accidentally launched his own shoes into the ceiling. But the warmth that usually filled Lupin's classes seemed dimmer today. When the bell rang, Lupin's voice rose gently above the scraping chairs. "Harry, would you stay back a moment?" Harry paused, exchanged a glance with Hermione and nodded. In Lupin's office, the fire was already lit. The room smelled of parchment, tea, and a faint trace of something like sandalwood. Lupin gestured to the chair across from his desk. "You're doing very well in class, Harry," he began, folding his hands. "Your charm work, your focus, it's stronger than I've seen all year." Harry gave a small nod, not sure how to respond. "But," Lupin continued, more softly, "there's something heavier in the air lately. I've noticed some distance between you and Ron. Hermione too, a bit." Harry sat back in his chair. "It's nothing, just stuff." Lupin smiled kindly. "I won't press, not if you'd rather not. But sometimes it helps to say the stuff out loud." After a moment's hesitation, Harry summarised the fallout. Firebolt, the accusations about Crookshanks and Scabbers, the anger, the feeling of being hunted, of not being understood. Lupin listened without interrupting. When Harry finished, the room was quiet again. Lupin nodded slowly. May I tell you something? Harry nodded. When I was your age, James was a great friend to me. But sometimes he was insufferably smug. Harry smiled slightly. But brave. And we had another friend, the rash one. He'd say something offhand and he'd already be halfway to doing it. Harry's expression stiffened. One night, Lupin continued, I was in the hospital wing because of my rare condition. James had been told not to visit. By Madame Pomfrey, by Dumbledore, by common sense. It wasn't safe. But around midnight, there he was at the window, flying a broom while balancing 2 butterbeers and a chocolate cauldron cake. Nearly broke his neck trying to land on the ledge. Harry blinked. Why'd he do that? Because he hated the idea of anyone he cared about being alone, especially in pain. Lupin smiled sadly at the memory, then shook his head. We argued the next morning. I was furious, thought he'd put both of us in danger, but he listened. He apologized. And he didn't stop being my friend, he just got better at being careful with the people he loved. Lupin leaned back in his chair. James had his faults. So did our more impulsive friend. But they never stopped trying to do right by each other. At least James. Harry looked down at his lap. He could hear the echoes of Ron's voice. You're ungrateful, reckless. And his own reply. You don't know what it's like to be hunted. You carry a lot, Harry, Lupin said gently. Anger's part of that. Just don't let it harden into distance. The people closest to you will disappoint you sometimes. That's part of being close. But so is forgiving them. Harry nodded quietly. And, for what it's worth, Lupin added, you're doing more than anyone has a right to expect. And still you keep showing up. That matters more than you know. Harry gave him a small, appreciative smile. Thanks, Professor. Lupin nodded. Any time. The next week, as the snow finally melted into slush and the promise of spring flickered in the air, a grim parchment arrived for Hermione during breakfast. She read it once, then again. Her spoon clattered against her plate. Harry leaned over. What is it? Hermione didn't speak at first, just handed him the letter with trembling fingers. He read the first few lines and felt his chest tighten. The Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures regrets to inform you that the appeal for the hippogriff Buckbeak has been denied. Execution scheduled for the 6th of June, pending ministry oversight. Hermione stared down at her hands. We did everything right. The notes, the precedents, we combed the law books. It wasn't supposed to be enough for them, was it? Harry's jaw clenched. It's Malfoy. His dad's got half the ministry on a leash. It's not fair, she whispered, her voice catching. Hagrid doesn't deserve this. Buckbeak doesn't deserve this. He shouldn't have to face it alone, Harry said, folding the letter tightly in his fist. We'll be there. We'll stand with him. Hermione nodded, but her usual certainty was gone. Her mouth was set, her eyes bright with unspoken fury. But beneath it was something else. Not the rage of a lost cause. The hurt of someone who'd always believed in systems, in rules, in reason, and who was now watching them fail. We'll find another way, Harry said. We have time on our side. Hermione didn't answer, but she picked up her spoon and started to eat again, slow and mechanical. She needed that illusion, normalcy however thin, to keep from shattering, and Harry let her have it. The sky was grey, thick with the weight of afternoon storm clouds, as Harry and Hermione crossed the long wooden bridge that curved toward the sloping hill above Hagrid's hut. A soft breeze rustled the grass, but neither spoke. Their footsteps thudded dully against the wood. Today was the day. Execution day. They were about to descend toward the small plateau overlooking the hut, when a voice called out behind them, "Oi, wait up!" Ron came jogging over, red-faced and panting, his wand awkwardly tucked behind his ear. Hermione turned, surprised. "Ron? He caught his breath. "I wanted to talk, to say I'm sorry, about everything." Harry hesitated, then gave a slight nod. "Yeah, me too. Been a rough few weeks." Before the moment could continue, another voice sliced through the air like a hex. "Well, isn't this touching?" Malfoy stood at the far end of the bridge, flanked by Crabbe and Goyle, arms folded, his smile oily with delight. "The golden trio back together at last. I almost missed the constant bickering. It made breakfast far more tolerable." Harry's fists clenched. Hermione narrowed her eyes. Malfoy smirked. Off to see the oaf blubber over his feathered beast? Poor Hagrid. What's next? A wake for a flobberworm? That did it. Hermione stepped forward, grabbed Harry's arm, and moved her wand in one swift motion. "Fulgari!" she shouted. The spell shot out like a whip of white lightning, more powerful than intended. Malfoy was yanked backward, mid-sneer, and slammed against a standing stone with a crack. Ropes of magical cords snapped into place, binding him to the rock like a marionette pinned to a wall. Crabbe and Goyle stared, dumbfounded. Harry and Ron stared too. "Bloody hell," they said in unison. Malfoy sputtered something rude, but the ropes tightened around his chest. Hermione, cheeks flushed, tucked her wand away with a tight huff. "Let's go." They dashed down the hill, boots slipping in damp grass, and pounded on Hagrid's door. He answered with red eyes and a tear-streaked beard, Fang pressed against his leg. "Thought he might come," Hagrid said, voice cracking. "Didn't think I'd need tissues for a ruddy hippogriff." They stepped inside. The fire was low, casting long shadows, and the room smelled of damp wool and treacle. Hagrid sat by the hearth, muttering fond memories to Fang. About Buckbeak's first flight, about how he once nuzzled Hagrid's beard like a curious kitten. Hermione crouched beside him. "We're so sorry, Hagrid." "You did what you could," he sniffed. "That petition was brilliant, but Lucius Malfoy's got more strings than a harpy does." Fang let out a soft whine and nosed at Harry's hand. The room was cluttered as always, jars of pickled something lining the shelves, giant teacups already laid out. But a strange stillness clung to the air, like a room that had just been disturbed. "Sit," Hagrid said. I was just telling Fang about the time Buckbeak nipped Goyle's trousers clean off during class. You should have seen his face, like he sat on a blast-ended scroot." He managed a small chuckle, but the mood didn't lift. Hermione crouched beside the fire, stirring the logs with a poker. "You don't have to go through this alone, Hagrid." He nodded slowly, rubbing his face. "Thanks. I know, just hurts, you know. Reason myself. He trusted me." Harry was about to speak when a loud creak echoed from above. They all froze. Hagrid looked up at the rafters. "What's that?" Hermione stood, eyes darting to the ceiling. "Maybe the wind?" "Doesn't sound like it," Harry muttered. Then something fell with a soft clink from a shelf in the corner. A jar of pickled slug larvae, rolling across the floor unprovoked. Hagrid frowned. "That shelf's been steady 20 years. Harry exchanged a glance with Hermione. Then, another oddity. The kettle on the stove suddenly whistled, even though the fire beneath it was out. Fang whimpered again. Hermione stood slowly, peering toward the back window. Outside, the faintest shape flickered. A blur of motion through the pumpkins. But when she blinked, it was gone. "You saw that, didn't you?" Harry said, voice low. She nodded. "Something's out there." "I'll check." Hagrid started, reaching for his crossbow, but Harry stopped him. Outside, 3 dark figures were making their way down the hill. Dumbledore, Fudge, and the executioner, carrying the glinting blade of the axe across his shoulders. Hagrid sprang to his feet. No, you lot can't be seen. Out the back, go! They scrabbled into the garden and ducked behind the oversized pumpkin patch. The wind whistled low between the stems. Hermione froze. Her eyes darted to the tree line. Did you hear something? Harry looked. Nothing. Probably Fang, Ron whispered, crouching low beside them. They stayed until the voices faded from inside. Then, quietly, they crept up the slope toward the bridge. Crabbe and Goyle had just finished sawing at the magical ropes pinning Malfoy to the rock. He tumbled forward with a grunt, brushing himself off with as much dignity as he could muster. Then the axe fell. Not far behind them, they heard the thunk of metal splitting wood. No cry, no scream, just the sound and the shuddering finality of it. Hermione gasped and turned into Harry's shoulder, tears slipping down her cheek. Ron, silent for a long moment, stepped forward and wrapped his arms around both of them. They stood there, a knot of warmth against the chill wind, bruised, divided, and reknit again. Whatever rift had grown between them, however angry, hurt, or afraid they'd been, it ended there, not with words, but with the grief of something lost and the quiet promise that they would face what came next, together. Unfortunately, the peace only lasted moments. From the hill, a rustling sound broke the stillness, soft at first, then frantic. Hermione turned, her brow furrowed. A flash of ginger fur darted across the grass. "Crookshanks," she said, squinting. "What's he—" Then came a high-pitched squeal. A scraggly grey blur bolted through the frosty brush. "Scabbers!" "There he is!" Ron shouted. "Oi, Scabbers!" Crookshanks gave chase, tail raised like a banner of war. "Oh, for Merlin's sake! Crookshanks, no!" Hermione cried, sprinting after them. Harry and Ron were already pelting down the hill. The trio tore through the brittle grass, scattering patches of snow as Ron dove forward and scooped the rat into his hands. "I've got him!" he panted, clutching the squirming creature to his chest. Ow! He bit me, the little—" Then Harry stopped cold. His heart slammed against his ribs. Standing just beyond the tree line, shadowed by the gnarled base of the whomping willow, was the black dog, the Grim. But this time, it didn't vanish like smoke. It didn't wait in the distance, staring with ghostly silence. This time, it lunged. "Ron! Look out!" Harry yelled. The dog tore across the grass, like a shadow with teeth. Ron turned. Too late. The beast clamped its jaws around his leg and yanked. With a cry of pain and panic, Ron tumbled backward. The tree exploded into motion. Branches cracked through the air like whips as the massive dog dragged Ron across the snow and toward a gap at the tree's roots. He vanished beneath the trunk, through a hole, into the earth. "Ron!" Hermione screamed. Harry didn't hesitate. He drew his wand and ran forward, but a thick branch came crashing down in front of him, forcing him to leap back. "The willow's active!" Hermione shouted, shielding her head as another branch swept wide. "We need to get under," Harry said. "There has to be a way." Then Crookshanks, agile and unbothered, darted toward the trunk. The cat paused, pressed a paw against a knot in the bark, and the tree stilled. The branches froze mid-whip, motionless. How did he? Hermione stammered. "Doesn't matter," Harry yelled. "Come on!" They dove for the base, dropping to their knees and crawling through the narrow tunnel. It was dark, damp, and sloped steeply downward, the smell of old roots and damp stone curling in their noses. "Ron!" Hermione called, her voice echoing. "Can you hear us?" Nothing. They ran, hunched, Harry leading with his wand raised, breath coming in ragged bursts. The tunnel twisted deeper into the earth, away from the tree, away from Hogwarts, towards something they couldn't yet see. Harry's mind raced. The dog, the prophecy, the truth he couldn't grasp. Whoever, or whatever, had taken Ron. He was going to find them, and he wasn't going to run anymore. They burst into the shrieking shack, wands drawn, breath ragged from the long dash through the tunnel. Dust swirled in the stale air, stirred by the sudden motion. The walls creaked as if whispering warnings, and every step echoed with haunted resonance. Harry raised his wand first, eyes blazing. "Where is he?" he snarled. In the shadowed corner, Sirius Black emerged, gaunt and wild, his eyes burning with something close to madness, but not quite. He was skeletal, with long, matted hair, and the expression of a man who had lived too long with ghosts. "Thought you'd come," he rasped, stepping forward. "If you want Harry," Ron said, limping in front of him, "you'll have to go through me." Before Sirius could even speak, Harry lunged.
"You betrayed them," he shouted, voice raw. "You sold them to Voldemort."
He launched himself at Sirius, fury overriding thought. The impact was hard and fast, and they slammed into the creaking floorboards. Sirius didn't fight back. He didn't even raise a hand. He let Harry's fists rain down until Hermione dragged Harry off with a forceful grunt. Harry pulled out his wand, pointed it at the gaunt man. Sirius began to laugh. Then, Expelliarmus! Harry's wand spun out of his wand and was caught by Professor Lupin. Harry turned, startled. "Professor?" Ron's mouth dropped open. "Lupin?" Lupin's face was unreadable as he stepped forward, but instead of pointing his wand at Sirius, he lowered it. He pulled Sirius up and into a hug. Sirius almost sounded like he was crying, calling Lupin an old friend. Hermione's eyes narrowed. "No! No, you're helping him!" she gasped. "We trusted you." "Enough," Lupin said again, calmer this time. "Just listen to me." "No, he's a murderer!" Harry shouted. "Why are you helping him?" But Lupin's voice was firm. "Because I believe he's innocent, and I have a soft heart for those who are persecuted without rationality." "What the hell are you talking about?" Harry bellowed. Hermione stared at him, then slowly stepped back, piecing things together. "The map, the moon phase in your office, and Snape's potion, Wolfsbane, his lesson about your..." Lupin nodded solemnly. "Yes," Hermione gasped. "You're a werewolf." Ron looked horrified. Harry was speechless. Sirius, behind them, laughed humorlessly. "Brilliant, isn't she?" "You're both mad," Ron spat. "No," said Lupin, stepping closer to Sirius. "But we've been fools. All of us." He turned to Harry more gently now. "There's something you need to understand. Years ago, your father, Sirius, Peter Pettigrew and I, we were best friends. James was my first true friend, and Sirius was his brother in all but blood." He looked at Sirius. "When I thought Sirius betrayed them, it broke me. But now I know it wasn't him." "You're lying," Harry said, quieter now but no less fierce. "I'm not," Lupin said, locking eyes with him. "Do you really think Sirius would betray James and Lily? He loved them. We all did." "Then who did?" Ron asked. "Peter Pettigrew. That rat bastard. He ruined them. He ruined me. I have waited 12 years, rotting in that hell of a prison, just to see the life leave his eyes," Sirius said. Before Sirius could go on further, the door crashed open again, and in swept Snape, wand already raised.
Well, well, he said silkily, "what a touching reunion." Sirius scowled. "Snivelus, Expelliarmus," Snape snapped, and all the wands flew into his hand. He smiled coldly. "You have no idea how long I've waited for this." "Severus," Lupin said, his tone urgent, "you're making a mistake." Snape didn't flinch. "I'm making a mistake. You've been protecting a fugitive and hiding your true nature from the staff. I should have known better than to trust a monster and a traitor." "Listen to me," Sirius shouted. "It wasn't me, it was Peter Pettigrew." Snape laughed. "Do you take me for a fool? Pettigrew is dead." "No," Lupin said. "He's not. The moment you came to me, Harry, saying you saw Peter on the map, I knew Sirius was innocent. But that was just a glitch, Harry added. You're wrong, Harry, Sirius said. The map never lies. I bet if we took it up right now, we would see him comfortably watching us dance around like fools. Snape blinked. What nonsense. We can prove it, said Lupin. Let us show you the truth. Snape pushed his wand to Lupin's throat. I will have none of it. I'm taking you in, both of you. Just then, Harry reached over and grabbed Hermione's wand. Stupefy, Harry bellowed. Red sparks launched out of the wand and knocked Snape into the wall, knocking him out cold. Harry looked frantic at Lupin and Sirius, desperate for answers. Tell me more about Peter. Lupin stared at the unconscious Snape, then turned to Harry, the tension in the room still thick as fog. That was reckless, he said, though there was a flicker of reluctant admiration in his voice, but perhaps necessary. I had to, Harry said, still panting. I need the truth. Sirius took a step forward, his face no longer wild with rage, but sharp with clarity. You deserve it. He looked to Lupin. A silent exchange passed between them. Lupin gave a slight nod. Tell him. Sirius took a breath, one that seemed to come from somewhere deep, someplace buried beneath 12 years of darkness. We were the Marauders, he began. James, Remus, Peter, and me. At Hogwarts, we were inseparable. We made that map to explore, to rebel, to know every corner of this castle. We were young and arrogant and thought we were invincible. Harry listened, his knuckles white around Hermione's wand. We discovered Remus's secret by second year, Sirius went on. We didn't run. We became animagi, unregistered. It took us years. I turned into a dog. James, a stag. Peter, a rat. Harry's heart skipped. A rat, he repeated hollowly. Sirius nodded. He worshipped James, followed him like a shadow. We thought he was harmless, but it was Peter who betrayed your parents. He was their secret keeper. We switched at the last moment to throw off suspicion. Only the four of us knew. But Peter ran to Voldemort and sold them. No, Ron muttered. No, Scabbers isn't... He is, Lupin said quietly. I've seen the map. I've seen Peter's name walking those halls, sleeping in the dormitory. Harry turned to Ron, the weight of it crushing down. You've been sleeping beside him for 3 years. Ron looked sick. Sirius clenched his fists. I tracked him. I escaped Azkaban the moment I saw his photo in that article about your family trip to Egypt. I knew it was him. The missing toe. He faked his death, framed me, and went into hiding as your pet. But why? Harry's voice cracked. Because Voldemort's rising again, Lupin said grimly. And Peter would do anything to crawl back into favor, even kill again. Sirius's voice broke. I didn't kill them, Harry. I'd die before I betrayed James and Lily. I would have died for them. The room fell silent. Hermione's eyes welled. Ron was pale as parchment. Harry looked down at Snape's crumpled body, then back at Sirius. Harry tilted his head. Show me. Sirius took the wand from Harry slowly, reverently, as though the gesture itself carried more weight than any spell. Thank you, he said softly. They turned to Ron, who was clutching his injured leg and staring at them like they were mad. No, he said, backing up a little. You're not seriously telling me Scabbers, my Scabbers, is some kind of Death Eater? Ron, Lupin said, voice firm but kind, you need to trust us. He's just a rat. Sirius stepped forward, lips curled with barely restrained hatred. No, he's a coward who lives like a rat, but he's no ordinary one. Ron's grip on Scabbers tightened.
The rat was trembling violently in his hands now, squealing and wriggling with panicked energy. "He knows," Sirius growled. "He knows we're here." "Ron, give him to us," Hermione urged. "Please." Ron hesitated, then slowly extended the rat, who thrashed and clawed at his fingers. Lupin took Scabbers gently but firmly, setting him on the floor of the shack. He drew his wand and looked at Sirius. "Together?" Sirius nodded. The two men raised their wands. "1." Harry stepped closer, wand ready. "2." Scabbers gave the final squeal. "3." "Revelio hominem!" they cried. There was a flash of light, a crack like splintering wood, and the rat was gone. In its place, curled on the floor in a heap of torn robes and gasping breaths, was a squat, balding man. His watery eyes blinked rapidly, darting around the room like a trapped animal. His hands trembled, his front teeth stuck out oddly, and his hair was patchy and limp. Peter Pettigrew. Ron let out a strangled gasp. Hermione recoiled, covering her mouth. Harry simply stared. Sirius stepped forward, eyes burning with a decade of vengeance. "Henno, Peter?" Pettigrew flinched like he'd been struck. "Sirius, Remus, wait! You don't understand. I had to. I was scared. He would have killed me." "You should have died," Sirius roared. "Died, like James and Lily." Peter fell to his knees. "I was weak. I never meant for them to die. You have to understand. He would have done it anyway. He was going to kill them with or without me." Lupin's voice was colder than steel. "You betrayed your friends, Peter. You framed Sirius. You let an innocent man rot in Azkaban for 12 years. I was trying to survive," Peter sobbed, looking wildly between the students. Harry, you know how it feels, don't you? To be afraid." "Don't talk to me," Harry snapped. "You killed them." Peter's breath hitched. Sirius raised his wand. "He doesn't deserve a trial." "Sirius," Harry said suddenly. "Wait." Everyone turned to him. "If we kill him now, there's no way to prove your innocence. Let's take him to the castle." Sirius stared at him, jaw tight. Then slowly, reluctantly, he lowered his wand. Lupin stepped forward, binding Peter's arms with a flick of his wand. "We'll bring him to Dumbledore. Let the truth come out." Peter trembled at their feet, bound and defeated. But the room felt lighter now. The lies were finally unraveling, and for the first time in years, Sirius Black could breathe. They left the shrieking shack under a blanket of silence, broken only by the wind's whistling and Peter Pettigrew's trembling breaths. The tunnel back was long and dark, but this time it wasn't fear that filled Harry's chest. It was a strange, simmering weight, heavy with questions and feelings he couldn't yet name. Sirius walked beside him, shoulders hunched, the chains of Azkaban still dragging behind every step. His gaunt face caught glimmers of wandlight in angles that made him look more ghost than man. And yet, there was something warmer in his gaze now, something real. Harry didn't speak for a long while, but as the tunnel stretched on and the shuffle of Lupin's footsteps faded ahead of them, he finally said. Sirius glanced over. "You all right?" Harry's jaw clenched. "You were always out there." Sirius stopped. "What?" Harry turned to face him, voice tight. "All my life I thought I had no one, that they died and left me to rot with the Dursleys. But you were out there. Not dead, not gone, just somewhere." Sirius looked gutted. "I'm not blaming you for being in Azkaban," Harry continued, the words coming faster now. "I know you were framed, I know you suffered, but I still can't help but think," he faltered. "Why wasn't I enough? Why didn't you break out sooner?" Sirius stepped forward slowly, like approaching something fragile. "Harry, I didn't even know if you were alive." "You didn't know?" "I didn't know anything," Sirius said, rough. "They don't give you newspapers in Azkaban. No letters, no visitors, only the dementors. The only reason I knew Peter was still alive was because I saw that photo of Ron's rat. It took years before I even remembered how to shift into a dog again. Years before I found the strength to slip past their guards. And when I did," he shook his head, "I didn't come for revenge. I came for him, for Peter." Harry was quiet. "I always meant to raise you," Sirius said, voice hoarse now. "James asked me, Lily did too. I held you the day you were born, but this tiny thing with a full head of hair and lungs like a banshee. James was laughing so hard he nearly dropped you. I remember thinking, I'd die for this boy." He looked at Harry now, really looked, not just at the scar or the famous eyes, but at the weight behind them. The way he stood too tense for a 13-year-old. The quiet exhaustion around his shoulders. "I missed everything," Sirius said. "Your first brew, your letters, your birthdays. I should have been there, wanted to be there, but the world decided otherwise. And I'm sorry, Harry. I am so sorry." Harry swallowed hard. The ache in his chest hadn't gone, but it had changed, softened. "It wasn't you I was mad at," he said quietly. "Not really. I've been alone for so long. I don't always know what to do when someone finally shows up." Sirius smiled faintly. James used to say the same thing when Lily found him. That made Harry huff a laugh, a small, real one. Sirius took a breath. "I can't stay, not yet. Too many eyes on me. But if Dumbledore clears my name, and he will, I'll come for you. Properly. No more Dursleys, no more cupboards, just home." The word hit Harry like a gust of warm wind. "Do you mean it?" he asked. Sirius's eyes glinted. "Every bit of it." The Whomping Willow's branches hung still under the calm of twilight. They emerged, one by one, Lupin first, helping Ron to his feet, then Sirius and Harry guiding the bound and squirming Peter Pettigrew through the grass. The air smelled of spring damp and wood smoke, peaceful, in a way that felt unnatural after everything that had just happened. Hermione's arms were wrapped tightly around herself. She glanced up at the sky and tensed. "It's late." Lupin looked too. He froze. The moon had begun to rise, full and bright, cresting the tops of the forbidden forest with terrible clarity. Sirius paled. "Remus." "No," Lupin muttered. "No, I forgot. The potion. I didn't take it today. Snape, he brought it, but I—" The rest of his words were lost to a sharp cry. He fell to his knees, trembling violently. Peter took the opportunity to writhe harder against his bonds, squealing under the cloth gag. "No," Lupin gasped, clawing at his chest. "No, not now. Get away from me." Lupin's body convulsed as bones reshaped themselves with sickening cracks. Hair spread like wildfire across his arms, his back. His mouth lengthened into a snout. His scream turned to a guttural howl. Harry could only stare in horror. "Run!" Sirius shouted, throwing himself forward and morphing mid-leap. One moment he was a gaunt man, then a massive black dog, crashing into the werewolf that had once been their professor. Fur and fang collided with a snarl. The two beasts tumbled through the grass, snapping and slashing, barely distinguishable in the dark. "Go!" Harry yelled, dragging Ron by the arm. Hermione followed, shaking. They barely made it 10 feet before Peter twisted one hand free. With a sharp pop, his form shimmered and collapsed inward. "Scabbers!" "No!" Harry shouted, lunging too late. The rat darted into the underbrush and was gone. Damn it, Sirius barked, knocked sideways by Lupin's flailing limbs. The werewolf turned toward the trio now, eyes glowing with unrecognizing rage. Then, a rustle behind them. Snape. He emerged from the tunnel with his wand raised, eyes widening in horror at the sight before him. "Lupin," he breathed. The werewolf turned sharply toward the sound, hackles raised. Snape stepped in front of Harry without thinking. "Get back," he ordered, voice sharp. "Protect..." But he was too slow. With an explosive lunge, the werewolf struck. Snape took the full brunt of the attack, shielding Harry with his body as he was hurled aside into the dirt. His wand clattered somewhere near the hedges.
"Professor!" Hermione cried. Sirius, bleeding from the shoulder, charged again. The chaos blurred together. Fur, flashes of teeth, panicked gasps. Harry raised his wand, breath ragged, unsure who to help first. Then, with a final heaving lunge, Lupin threw Sirius down the hill, tumbling towards the lake's shore. Then the werewolf turned on the children again, when suddenly a long, haunting howl echoed across the grounds. It wasn't Lupin. It came from beyond the trees. The werewolf froze. Its ears pricked toward the sound and ran towards it, escaping into the dark tree line. Snape groaned from the grass, shifting slightly but unconscious. His robes were torn at the shoulder where the werewolf had struck him. Blood stained the fabric, and his breathing was shallow but steady. Harry dropped to his knees beside him, breathless. He protected me," he muttered, stunned. Hermione crouched beside him, gently brushing stray leaves from Snape's sleeve. He didn't even hesitate. Ron stood unsteadily behind them, cradling his injured leg, looking equally shaken. "I'll stay with him," Hermione said, her voice tight but resolute. "Check on Sirius. He tumbled down by the lake, if he's hurt." Harry nodded once and took off at a sprint down the slope, heart pounding. The grass was slick underfoot, the sky blackening fast. A faint mist began curling along the edges of the forest, clinging low to the ground like fingers searching for warmth. He found Sirius near the rocky shore of the lake, slumped over and human once more. His ragged breathing fogged the cold air. Blood streaked his temple. He looked up groggily as Harry dropped beside him. "Still standing, are you?" Sirius wheezed, a crooked smile barely forming. Harry grabbed his arm. "We need to move. Lupin's gone, and Snape's out cold. Pettigrew escaped." Sirius swore under his breath. "Figures." Then Harry froze. A terrible cold swept over them, as if the lake had exhaled all its warmth. The mist deepened, crawling in thick ropes from the water's edge. The shadows of trees seemed to stretch unnaturally. The dementors were coming. They emerged from the mist like silent phantoms. 12, maybe more, gliding across the ground in a slow, steady advance. Sirius struggled upright, his wand out but trembling. "Harry, get back." "No," Harry said, planting himself in front of him. "They're after you. I won't let them take you." The chill bit into his bones. His vision blurred. The sound of his mother screaming filled his ears, sharp and piercing, dragging him into memory. Not again. Not this time. Expect. He couldn't finish it. His legs gave out. Sirius collapsed behind him, breath shallow and fogging. The dementors circled. Darkness closed in. And then, a light. A blazing silver arc swept across the water's edge. A stag. Towering, radiant and fierce, it thundered forward, antlers lowered. It scattered the dementors like ash in a gale, driving them back across the lake, where they dissolved into the mist. Harry,
barely conscious, watched it for a heartbeat more. Then everything went black. The world returned in fragments. First, the rhythmic ticking of a clock. Then, the sharp scent of antiseptic and lavender. Then voices, muffled as though behind a curtain. Harry stirred. His body ached, but it was the cold that lingered, a phantom chill as if the lake's breath still clung to his skin. His eyelids fluttered open to a dimly lit hospital wing, moonlight slanting through tall windows. He heard footsteps, a rustle of robes.
3 turns should do it,
a voice said, clear and deep. Dumbledore. Harry's vision sharpened, blinking away the haze. Hermione stood near the far end of the ward, speaking in hushed tones with the headmaster. She clutched something on a chain tightly in her fist, knuckles white. Her expression was a mixture of fear and resolve. Dumbledore turned slightly toward Harry's bed and gave a small, knowing wink.
Harry blinked again.
"Professor?"
"Ah, you're awake,"
Dumbledore said lightly, strolling toward his bedside with his hands folded neatly behind his back. "Excellent timing." Harry sat up slowly, wincing. His muscles felt like they'd been trampled by a hippogriff. "Ron?" he asked hoarsely. "Sleeping," Dumbledore said gently. "A fractured leg that Madame Pomfrey assures me he'll be mended by sunrise." Harry glanced across the room. Ron lay on the next bed over, face pale, leg elevated and wrapped tightly in bandages. His breathing was slow and steady. "What happened?" Harry asked. "Sirius? Lupin?" Dumbledore's smile was faint. "Events are not yet as they should be, but they may yet be corrected." Harry frowned. "What does that mean?" Instead of answering directly, Dumbledore turned to Hermione. "Miss Granger, if you're ready." She nodded, her eyes meeting Harry's. There was something electric in her stare. Purpose. Urgency. Harry swung his legs over the bed. "What's going on?" "I'll explain on the way," Hermione said briskly, moving toward him and unclasping the fine golden chain from around her neck. A tiny hourglass dangled from it, glinting in the low light. Harry stared at it. "What the? It's a time-turner," she said, as if he understood. Before he could ask another question, she stepped close and slipped the chain around both their necks. She grasped the hourglass and looked to Dumbledore. 3 turns, he reminded her. Be seen by no one, and save more than one innocent life tonight. Hermione nodded. She twisted the hourglass. The world spun. The hospital wing melted into golden blurs. Light reversed. Time collapsed inward, and they were yanked out of the present with a whoosh of air and a shimmer of magic. Moments later, the sun was just setting again over the castle, and their second chance had begun. The golden light of early evening washed over the castle once more, birds chirping from the eaves, the warm smell of grass rising from the earth. Somewhere in the distance, the clock tower chimed 7. Harry stumbled as they landed, one hand still on the chain around his neck. What just happened? We're 3 hours in the past, Hermione said quickly, already scanning the horizon and motioning him forward. Come on, we don't have much time. Harry blinked at her. You've been using this all year. She nodded, eyes sharp with focus as they slipped behind a stone wall near the hospital wing's courtyard and began walking through the wooden bridge towards Hagrid's hut. It's called a time-turner, she said. Dumbledore gave it to me at the start of the year. The Ministry only approved 5 prototype models for testing. He didn't trust the others with them. Harry blinked at her. You've been using this all year? She nodded, eyes sharp with focus as they slipped behind a stone wall near the hospital wing's courtyard, began walking through the wooden bridge towards Hagrid's hut. It's called a time-turner, she said. Dumbledore gave it to me at the start of the year. The Ministry only approved 5 prototype models for testing. He didn't trust the others with them. "You've been time travelling," Harry hissed, still trying to wrap his head around it. "Only for classes," she said, "mostly. I had to submit weekly logs to Dumbledore and meet with him twice a week to discuss boundaries. Technically, I'm part of a study on responsible academic augmentation under temporal strain." She made air quotes with one hand, clearly unimpressed. But why you?" Hermione looked a little sheepish. "He said I was the only one he trusted to follow the rules." "Right," Harry muttered. "Except now we're sneaking around Hogwarts past midnight to save an escaped convict and a condemned hippogriff." "That's different," Hermione snapped, but not harshly. "He told me if there ever came a time when I needed to use it for something more, something important, he trusted me to know. And tonight, this is that time." Harry was still processing. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I wasn't supposed to tell anyone," she said quickly. "The Time Turner law is ridiculously strict. If anyone finds out, Dumbledore could lose his position, and I could be, well, obliviated, or worse. And honestly, Harry, I didn't want to be that person. The know-it-all who can literally be in 2 places at once." Harry looked at her sideways. "You are that person." She elbowed him lightly. "Only on Tuesdays and Thursdays." They both laughed, but it was short-lived. Hermione's pace quickened. "There's more. Dumbledore said these prototypes shouldn't even exist. The theory came from Merlin's writings, but the Ministry buried it for centuries. Too dangerous, too many paradoxes." "Then why did they make them?" "Because Fudge wanted power," Hermione said. "Control over disasters. Imagine rewinding time by 5 hours before something exploded in the atrium, or reassigning an aura 5 minutes before a Death Eater attack." Harry frowned. "So why did Dumbledore agree to any of it?" "He didn't. That's why he took one and gave it to me," she said, eyes narrowing. "He said time travel should never be institutionalized, but if it had to be tested, he'd rather it be quietly and ethically by someone he trusted. So I've been his steward, I guess." Harry stared at her, a mix of awe and disbelief. "And you've been doing all this alone?" She hesitated. "After last year. After the diary, and what it did to me. He thought it might help. Give me something to focus on. And he said maybe, one day, it would help save someone." They walked in silence a moment. Hagrid's hut just ahead, the pumpkin patch visible over the slope. "Why now?" Harry asked. "Why not use it to stop Sirius earlier? Or Pettigrew?" Hermione's voice dropped. "Because we couldn't. We can't change everything. We'd risk unraveling things, but saving Buckbeak, that's a fixed moment. If we do it right, no one sees us. No one knows, and Sirius, he doesn't deserve to go back to Azkaban." Harry was quiet for a long time. "How many versions of you have I seen this year?" Hermione gave a nervously smile. "Probably more than you realised. But this is the first time you've seen the real me doing it." They reached the top of the hill above Hagrid's hut. The sun was just low enough to cast long shadows over the plateau's grass. The shots is hid by the bridge's exit. "It's almost time," Hermione said. "We wait until after our parcels go into the hut, then we sneak around back and free Buckbeak while no one's looking." "And what about Lupin?" Harry asked, glancing toward the distant edge of the forest. Hermione hesitated. "We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But right now, we're here to save 2 lives." Harry nodded, and the Time Turner gleamed faintly in the falling dusk. Just beyond, the plateau stretched out in full view, and the silhouettes of 3 familiar figures crested the bridge. Harry, Hermione, and Ron from 3 hours ago. Harry shifted uncomfortably beside Hermione. "This is weird." Just wait, Hermione whispered, tugging his sleeve. Watch. Their past selves came to a sudden halt as Malfoy, Crabbe and Goyle strolled into view. The encounter played out just as they remembered. Malfoy's mocking drawl, Ron's clenched fists, and then Fulgari, past Hermione, had shouted, her voice shaking. The ropes that burst from her wand had surged like lightning, far more powerful than the spell required. Malfoy was slammed backward into a standing stone and pinned there, eyes wide with shock, as thick magical bindings wrapped around both him and the rock itself. It hadn't been a normal casting, not even close. Bloody hell, present Harry whispered again, echoing Ron's voice from the past. Then he turned to the Hermione beside him. Okay, seriously, how did you do that? Hermione flushed slightly, eyes still locked on the scene below. I don't exactly know, Harry raised a brow. It keeps happening. It's small things usually, but every time we're close, or I'm trying to protect you, my spells, they overcharge, just like this one, Hermione murmured. And it's not random. The pattern is consistent. It only happens when I'm close to you. The stronger my emotion, and the closer I am physically, the greater the amplification. Harry blinked. So it's because of me? Well, not entirely, I don't know, she admitted. That's what's frustrating. I've tried to find something in the library, old journals, magical theory scrolls, even odd cases and spellcraft texts, but there's nothing exactly like it. Just whispers of magical resonance effects, but even those are vague. He tilted his head, thoughtful. So what do you think it is? Hermione hesitated, glancing back toward the rock where Malfoy was still struggling against his ropes. I think it might be some kind of bond, she said carefully. Not like a vow or anything formal, just a connection. Maybe because of everything we've been through, or maybe something happened when I was possessed last year, or when we faced the stone in first year, I don't know. Harry frowned. Have you talked to Dumbledore? A few times, she said quietly. I haven't told him everything, just the major incidents. He listened. He said it might be something rare, something old, but he wasn't sure. That surprised Harry. He didn't know? He said it reminded him of a few cases from long ago, things that happened between witches and wizards under extreme pressure, magic responding emotionally, like it becomes reactive or entangled. Harry looked away. Great, so our emotions are setting off explosions now. Hermione gave a small smile. That would explain your hair. He laughed softly, then turned serious again. But it's not dangerous, is it? I don't think so, Hermione said. Just unpredictable. They both turned as their past selves started walking down to Hagrid's hut. Hermione gently pulled Harry's sleeve. Come on, that's our cue. They crouched low behind the pumpkin patch outside Hagrid's hut, the last golden edge of sunlight fading from the hills. The weight of the time turner pulsed faintly against Hermione's chest, as if aware they were nearing the moment that would define everything. Harry glanced sideways at her. So, all those turns you've taken this year, he whispered. Does that technically make you older? Hermione didn't look at him, just narrowed her eyes at the sloping hill. Technically, yes. Maybe by a few weeks. Don't get any ideas. Harry smirked. So you're the mature one then? She gave him a dry look. Well, someone has to be. They both went quiet as three familiar figures appeared at the top of the hill. Dumbledore, Fudge, and the executioner McNair, dark as a shadow against the twilight. The trio started down the hill, cloaks billowing faintly behind them. Harry tensed. They're heading for the hut, but they shouldn't be. Didn't they leave right away the first time? Hermione's lips parted in realization. No. They stayed a little too long, and then we heard something from the rafters, like a noise. We thought it was nothing, but... She dug into her robes for her wand. We're the ones who caused it. Right, Harry whispered. Like a loop. Exactly, she said. If we don't recreate the distractions, our past selves won't leave in time and will ruin everything. They crept closer, positioning themselves behind a cluster of low shrubs just beyond the hut's window. Hermione peeked through the glass. "Now," she whispered. She raised her wand toward the outer beams of the hut, focused on the thin wooden rafters just beneath the eaves. "Depulso." Inside, they heard it. A soft knock overhead, just enough to stir Hagrid's attention. "Was that?" Hagrid's voice floated through the open window. Hermione crouched lower, barely breathing. Then Harry lifted his wand and aimed at a shelf. Inside the hut, one of Hagrid's old pickling jars rolled slowly off the shelf. It hit the floor with a soft clink. Hagrid's chair creaked. "That shelf's been steady 20 years. Their past selves stirred. Hermione could just make out her former self glancing upward nervously. Still not enough. Hermione pointed again. "Vaporalis." The iron kettle resting on the cold stove began to whistle. Not loudly, but clearly. A shrill, unnatural sound. The fire underneath was long dead. Inside, their past selves stood quickly. Hermione saw herself clutching Ron's arm, whispering urgently. There. They were leaving. Present Hermione let out a tight breath. It's working. Past Harry knocked on the hut door again, and within moments, the trio was spilling outside and up the hill, winding through the grass and back toward safety. Hermione grabbed Harry's sleeve. "Quick! The forest. Before we're seen." They ducked behind the trees and slipped into the shadows, the sound of receding footsteps and muttered voices echoing behind them. The edge of the woods welcomed them with silence, and Buckbeak waited nearby, tethered loosely beneath a skeletal tree. The moment was approaching. They were nearly ready. Harry and Hermione crept toward Buckbeak. The hippogriff stirred, wings shifting restlessly as they approached. But he didn't rear up or snap. His amber eyes studied them, uncertain but not aggressive. Harry bowed low. Hermione followed his lead. After a long pause, Buckbeak dipped his beaked head in return. "That's it," Hermione whispered. "We're okay." Harry stepped forward, undoing the leather tether around the tree. The moment it fell loose, Buckbeak gave a soft, waffling snort and nudged Harry gently in the shoulder. "I think he remembers me," Harry said, smiling faintly. They led Buckbeak deeper into the forest, settling him beside a grove of thin pines cloaked in shadow. Hermione conjured a few floating leaves to keep him distracted while they sat nearby, tucked behind a rise in the earth that gave them just enough cover. From here, they had a clear view of the whomping willow in the distance, its branches still as bones. The wind had quieted. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. Hermione sat cross-legged, her knees hugged to her chest. "We've done everything right so far," she murmured, but her eyes were fixed ahead. Harry nodded absently, lost in his own thoughts. After a moment, Hermione glanced at him. "What did Sirius say? After everything in the shack?" Harry exhaled. He asked if I wanted to live with him." Hermione blinked. "He what?" "If Pettigrew had been turned in, if things had gone right, I would have left the Dursleys, lived with him." Harry's voice was low, but a thread of wonder still clung to the edges. "He's my godfather. He wants me." Hermione's expression softened. "That's wonderful, Harry." He didn't answer right away. The wind shifted. "Do you think you're selfish to still want it?" he finally asked. "Even after everything?" "No," Hermione said quietly. "It's not selfish at all." They sat in silence again, eyes on the tree. Then Harry leaned forward. "When the dementors came, back at the lake, I saw someone. On the other side." Hermione turned to him. "A patronus," he said. "But not mine. It was... I don't know how to explain it. I thought it was my dad." Hermione furrowed her brow. "Your dad?" "I know how it sounds, but there was this stag, standing there, right before everything went black, and it felt like..." He shook his head, frustrated. "I know it wasn't real, but it felt like it." Hermione was quiet, processing. "There's no way he was really there," Harry said. "But maybe it meant something. Maybe it's like he was watching. I don't know." Hermione hesitated. "Sometimes magic doesn't always obey the rules. Maybe it was a memory or a feeling made real for a second. Or maybe it was something else." "Something else," Harry echoed. Hermione just looked at him, her gaze thoughtful but unreadable. Then, a rustle from the tunnel. They both snapped to attention. A small shape, Scabbers, bolted from the hole, followed by larger figures. Past Harry, Ron, and Hermione emerged from the Whomping Willow's roots, wide-eyed and breathless. Hermione grabbed Harry's sleeve. "Come on, it's almost time." From their perch, just inside the tree line, Harry and Hermione watched the shadows move across the grounds, like players in a dream. Past Harry had just helped Sirius out of the tunnel. Past Snape emerged seconds later, wand drawn. Then it happened, again. Lupin convulsed, his body contorted under the rising moonlight, twisting into something unrecognizable. A werewolf now stood in his place, snarling at shadows. Future Hermione's breath caught. "Oh no!" The werewolf turned, fixated not on past Harry or Sirius, but on the trio watching from afar. The timeline had shifted. Something was wrong. Snape stepped between the werewolf and the students, just like before, but he... Hermione's eyes widened. "No, it's going to happen again!" Then she stepped forward, heart in her throat, cupped her hands to her mouth, and howled. It was unnatural, shaky yet eerily wolfish. The echo tore through the trees like a warning shot across time. Harry's hands gripped his head. "This is insane," he muttered. "This is completely insane." The werewolf froze, ears twitching. Then it bolted towards them. "Run!" Hermione shrieked. They turned and bolted through the trees, branches clawing at their cloaks, the thundering of paws behind them. The forest was a blur of black trunks and pale moonlight. Every breath burned. Every shadow looked like teeth. They ducked behind a mossy boulder, panting. For a moment, nothing. Then, snap. A twig. Snarl. Closer. Harry shoved Hermione behind him, wand raised but trembling. The werewolf burst through the underbrush, eyes glowing, muscles coiled. It pounced. "No!" Harry yelled, throwing himself between it and Hermione. But a shriek split the air, not from them, but from above. With a thunderous beat of wings, Buckbeak dove from the canopy, talons slashing, beak open in fury. The werewolf barely had time to register before the hippogriff collided with it, knocking it sideways into the underbrush. The beast whimpered and fled into the dark, crashing away through the woods, tail tucked. Hermione gasped, clutching Harry's arm. He saved us!" Buckbeak circled once, then landed with a grunt, keeping a protective eye on them. Harry's chest heaved, but it wasn't over. A chill swept through the trees. The light dimmed. From across the lake, high above, they saw them. Dementors, a swarm of them, gliding across the sky like funeral banners, drifting towards the far shore where past Harry and Sirius now lay unconscious. The moonlight turned cold. Harry stepped forward, breath frosting. "That's it," he said quietly. "That's the moment." Hermione looked at him. "What are you going to do?" Harry's jaw tightened. "Watch what really happened." They broke through the trees at the opposite side of the lake. Cold wind tore at their cloaks and the moon sat swollen in the sky, casting a sickly silver sheen over the rippling black water. Harry froze. Across the lake, on the far bank near the water's edge, lay two figures, one crumpled, unmoving, the other barely stirring, himself and Sirius. The dementors descended like vultures in slow motion, taking turns siphoning the life from their bodies. Their cloaks billowed with every draw of breath, their bony fingers twitching as if savouring the despair. Harry stared, transfixed, willing something, anything to intervene. Any second now, he thought. Any second, someone would appear. His father, a guardian, the stag, he remembered, would come galloping out from the trees, silver and proud and full of defiance. Any second. But no one came. Sirius groaned once. Harry on the ground writhed, then fell still, and still, nothing came. Harry's stomach twisted. "No," he whispered. "Come on, Dad, please." His eyes burned, then widened. It wasn't going to happen. No one was coming. It had never been anyone else. "It was me," Harry breathed, stepping forward. He saw the truth now, not in theory, but in lived clarity. The memory he had clung to in the hospital wing, the stag bounding across the water, banishing the darkness. It had never been James Potter. It had been him. He had saved them, not his father, him. "I can do it," he whispered. His hand trembled as he raised his wand. "I already did." The knowledge settled into his bones. Not nostalgia, not hope, but certainty. And that certainty ignited something inside him. Not just courage, not just will, but joy. A fierce, radiant joy that came from understanding. He was the light in the darkness. The darkness didn't define him. He did. "Expecto Patronum!" His voice shattered the silence like thunder across glass. From the tip of his wand, silver exploded. The stag burst forth, galloping across the water like a god of light. Its hooves struck the surface without sinking, its antlers ablaze with magic. It roared across the lake, blinding and pure, scattering the dementors like leaves in a gale. The creatures shrieked, shriveled, retreated, fleeing the stag, fleeing the light. Harry stood panting, tears on his face he hadn't realised were there, watching his patronus wheel proudly at the lake's edge before returning to him, dissolving in a mist of shimmering silver. Hermione stepped forward, speechless. No amount of turns of time could help her do that. Buckbeak's wings flapped powerfully as they soared over the towers of Hogwarts, the wind roaring in their ears, the moon full and bright above them. "There!" Hermione shouted over the gust, pointing at the tower where Sirius was locked away. His narrow cell window jutted out like a forgotten balcony. Harry tugged Buckbeak's reins and the hippogriff swooped closer, circling once before landing heavily on the narrow ledge. The stone trembled beneath the impact, but Buckbeak clung to it with sharp talons. Inside the barred cell, Sirius stood up fast, eyes going wide with disbelief. "What in?" Hermione didn't wait. She leant forward, grabbed Harry's arm for balance and thrust her wand forward. "Reducto!" The wooden door exploded off its hinges in a shower of splinters. Sirius stumbled back, coughing at the dust. "Blimey," he muttered, stunned. "Was that you?" Hermione grinned breathlessly. "Get on!" Sirius laughed, hoarse and half-mad with joy. "You two really are James and Lily's, aren't you?" He vaulted onto Buckbeak behind them in one fluid motion. Harry steered Buckbeak off the ledge with a yank, and the beast launched back into the air. Wind howled past them, the castle a blur below, and for one fleeting moment they were free. 3 silhouettes flying high above the stone turrets, weightless and unstoppable. They landed softly in the grass just outside the courtyard. Sirius slipped off first, feet hitting the ground with a shaky thud. He turned, running a hand through his matted hair, and looked at Harry in a way that froze time.
"I want you to know something," he said,
eyes glinting under the moonlight. "If there ever comes a day when the world isn't hunting me, you'll have a home. With me. Harry's breath caught. I can live with you. Sirius nodded. Not yet. I need to lie low, disappear for a while. But when the time comes... He stepped forward and placed a hand on Harry's shoulder. I'll be there. Harry didn't know what to say, but he felt something settle inside him. A quiet promise, a future worth hoping for. Sirius looked at Hermione next, his expression softening. And you brilliant witch. Thank you. Hermione flushed but managed to smile. Just don't get caught. Sirius gave them both a final nod, climbed back onto Buckbeak, and without another word kicked off the ground. Buckbeak soared into the night, Sirius silhouetted against the glowing moon, one last flash of wild freedom. The chimes of the tower clock began to sound. Hermione's eyes widened. Come on, we have to get back. She grabbed Harry's hand and they sprinted back through the courtyard, wind at their backs and moonlight on their heels. The past was nearly caught up. The future was already beginning. They slipped through the hospital wing doors just as the final bell chime echoed through the stone halls. Hermione shut the door behind them with a soft click and pressed her back against it, heart pounding. We made it, she whispered. Harry was already moving. Ron lay in his hospital bed, leg in a cast, snoring lightly with a bandage wrapped around his head. Snape lay on another cot nearby, still unconscious but stirring slightly. A large bruise coloured his temple, and his lip curled even in sleep. The only one awake was Madame Pomfrey, who was too busy muttering over a tray of salves to notice them slipping in. They quietly tiptoed back to their beds and climbed in, trying to appear as though they'd never left. At that moment, the door creaked open. Professor Dumbledore entered, his eyes twinkling behind his half-moon glasses as he glanced between the peacefully unconscious Snape, the groggy Ron, and the very much not unconscious Harry and Hermione. Ah, he said softly, back just in time. Everything appears to be in order. Hermione let out a breath and sank into the pillows. Dumbledore turned to Harry with a knowing smile. You did beautifully. Harry blinked, but what about Sirius? Dumbledore's gaze flicked toward the window, where the moon hung above the trees. I believe he is safely on his way, thanks to a timely intervention. I doubt the Ministry will be able to catch him, at least not tonight. He moved toward the door, pausing only once. And Professor Snape, when he wakes, will believe he merely overexerted himself trying to apprehend Sirius Black, a regrettable head injury in the line of duty. Hermione coughed into her hand, hiding a smile. Dumbledore looked back at them, softer now. You must understand, not many can face what you two face tonight, and come through stronger. Be proud, but rest, and let time carry the rest. He exited without another word, his cloak whispering against the floor. As silence reclaimed the room, a low groan rose from the other end of the wing. Ron shifted in his bed, blinking against the lantern light. Where? His voice was rough with sleep, and he winced as he tried to sit up. Did we win the cup or something? Why does my leg feel like it's been used as a beater's bat? Harry and Hermione glanced at each other, then hurried to his bedside. Ron, Hermione whispered, reaching out. Ron squinted at them. You're alive, he said groggily, then frowned. Wait, are we alive? Harry laughed softly, shaking his head. Yeah, mate, we made it. There was a pause. Then Ron furrowed his brow and said, Look, about everything I said before the willow, about Scabbers and the broom and you two. Hermione raised her hand. You don't have to. No, Ron said, more firmly. I do. I was wrong. About Crookshanks. About you two always leaving me out. I was angry and stupid. You were trying to protect me and... I'm sorry. Hermione blinked quickly and Harry smiled. Harry pulled a chair up beside him. I wasn't exactly winning Friend of the Year either, he said. I lashed out. And I shouldn't have. You were just being careful. And I, Hermione added, may have slightly overreacted about the broom. She offered a sheepish smile. Or a lot. Ron chuckled. It's okay. I still think Crookshanks was eyeing Scabbers funny. Ron, Hermione said warningly. All right. He raised his hands. Truce? Truce, Harry said, offering his fist. Ron bumped it with his. Hermione rolled her eyes and added her own hand over theirs. For what it's worth, Ron said, glancing between them. I'm glad I was wrong. About Sirius. And about us. You two really did something incredible tonight. Hermione smiled. So did you. They sat there in a circle of lamplight, the hospital wing quiet around them. Their wounds would heal, the nightmares would fade, and whatever else lay ahead, they would face it, together.
Spring settled gently over Hogwarts, melting the last traces of winter from the hills and castle walls. Life, somehow, resumed its rhythm. With Sirius safe and Buckbeak free, the trio did their best to return to normal, though normal had taken on a new shape. Classes pressed on. Hermione, to no one's surprise, managed to keep pace with her overwhelming course load, finishing top of nearly every subject. Harry, newly driven and emotionally lighter than he'd felt all year, found his concentration sharper. He aced Professor Lupin's final defense against the Dark Arts Project, a practical patronus demonstration, and received one of the few outstanding marks Lupin ever gave. Even Ron, once he'd healed enough to walk without wincing, rallied just in time for exams. He barely passed potions, to Snape's eternal dismay, but beamed with pride after earning and exceeds expectations in charms and transfiguration while flaunting his wand as a prized jewel. On the last week of school, Lupin invited Harry into his office for a chat. Harry stood in the doorway to Professor Lupin's office, uncertain if he should knock. The door was ajar, and inside, the walls looked emptier. The shelves were bare, the familiar smell of old parchment and dark chocolate lingered like memory itself. A worn trunk sat near the hearth, half-packed. Books were stacked beside it with neat precision. Lupin was folding a long cloak when he looked up and smiled. Harry.
His voice was calm, gentle even. But something about the lines around his eyes felt older than before. He set the cloak down and gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. Come in. Harry stepped inside and saw the copy of the Daily Prophet on Lupin's desk. The headline read, "Dark creature in our classroom. Anonymous source reveals dangerous truth about Professor." Harry stared at it, then looked up. It was Snape, wasn't it? Lupin didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat behind the desk with the quiet grace of someone who had already let go of the fight. He let it slip, yes, he said softly. Perhaps on purpose, perhaps not, but it's out now. But you didn't do anything wrong, Harry blurted, heart thudding. You were the best defense teacher we've had ever. Lupin smiled at that, a little sadly. Thank you. That means more than you know. Harry's fists clenched at his sides. It's not fair. Dumbledore could have stopped them. He knew. He trusted you. He did, Lupin said, with no bitterness. And I will always be grateful for that. But there are limits, Harry. This world, it's not kind to people like me. Especially not when the word werewolf is involved. But it's not who you are. No, Lupin agreed. But it's what I am. And some people will always see that first. He stood and walked over to one of the tall windows. The late spring light caught the grey in his hair and the wear in his robes. The truth is, I'm not angry, just tired. I've spent a lot of my life hiding or apologizing for what I am. This year, with you, with your classmates, I didn't have to do either. Not really. That's a gift I won't forget. Harry looked down, throat to hunt. So you're leaving? Yes. Lupin turned back and offered him a small box wrapped in brown paper. But not far, and not forever. Harry took it slowly. On top was a folded note, his name written in Lupin's clean script. I want you to keep writing, Lupin said. If you ever need advice or a story about your father, or just someone to talk to. Harry nodded, afraid to speak. Lupin smiled again, this time more warmly. You remind me of James, you know. Not just your face. Home Merlin, sometimes it's like seeing a ghost. But your heart. He could be reckless, sure. But he never stopped fighting for what mattered. Harry swallowed hard.
Did you ever blame Sirius for what happened?
Lupin was quiet for a long moment. I did, he said. And I was wrong. The truth is, grief doesn't always wait for proof. It feeds on silence, on absence. He reached across the desk and set a hand on Harry's shoulder. You have people who care about you. Don't let anger build where understanding should be. Harry nodded again. Thanks, Professor. Lupin smiled. Call me Remus now. As Harry turned to go, he paused at the door and looked back. Were you scared? He asked quietly. Teaching here, around everyone. Lupin's eyes flicked to the Prophet headline, then back to Harry. Not once. Not while I was here. That's how I knew it was time to go. Harry left in silence, the box under his arm. In the corridor, he opened the note. The best defense comes from knowing what you're defending. R.J. Lupin. Inside the box were 3 neatly wrapped bars of Honeyduke's finest chocolate and a photo, slightly curled, of 4 laughing boys in Gryffindor scarves. James, Sirius, Peter and Lupin, arms slung around one another, framed by a golden autumn day. Later that day, Hermione found Harry in the courtyard where the late spring breeze rustled through the trees and the last of the exam stress had begun to dissolve into end-of-term calm. Come with me, she asked, clutching a slim, worn folder to her chest. Where? To Dumbledore's office. I have to return something. The spiral staircase rotated silently beneath their feet, golden gears clicking gently in the walls as they ascended. When they entered, Dumbledore was already waiting behind his cluttered desk, fingers tented beneath his chin, forks preening quietly on his perch by the window.
Ah, Miss Granger. Mr. Potter, he said, eyes twinkling. I suspected I might see you both today.
Hermione stepped forward and placed the leather pouch containing the time turner on his desk, along with several parchment pages bound neatly together. My final thesis, she said. It's all there. Spell consistency, synchronization thresholds, side effects of repeated use, and my conclusion. Dumbledore took the bundle with care, flipping open the first page. And that conclusion? Hermione squared her shoulders.
Although the Time Turner is operationally consistent and powerful, its risks outweigh its usefulness. Too many close calls, too much uncertainty, too many moments that could have unraveled reality. I think it's too dangerous to remain in circulation, especially among students. There was a long silence. Dumbledore read the first few lines, then closed the report with reverence. "Your work," he said softly, "is among the most impressive I've seen from a Hogwarts student in quite some time." Hermione flushed, caught between pride and humility. "I will be forwarding this to the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes," Dumbledore continued. "I expect they will have much to think about." He smiled and added, "You'll be compensated with a modest stipend for your role in the research. Consider it a gift for services to magical safety." "Thank you, Professor," Hermione whispered, stunned. Dumbledore then turned to Harry, his smile softening. "And you, Mr. Potter. This year has tested you, perhaps more than any before. You've faced fear, betrayal. You've stared down both the past and future, and remained yourself." Harry didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. Dumbledore reached into a drawer, withdrew a long, rectangular box, and placed it on the desk. "For your bravery, your loyalty, and for gifting me yet another Gryffindor Quidditch Cup, though I shall pretend not to be pleased by that." He opened the lid. Inside lay the firebolt. Harry blinked. "You're giving it back?" "With Madam Hooch's full inspection," Dumbledore said. "No dark magic. Only excellent broomcraft. And a rather generous soul who wished to see you fly again." Harry's chest tightened. "Sirius." "He's watching over you," Dumbledore said, eyes kind. "In his own wild way." Fawkes gave a quiet trill from the window. Dumbledore leaned back, steepling his fingers once more. "The world beyond these walls is not as forgiving as I wish it were. But this castle, and the bonds forged within it, they are rare magic indeed. You've both proven that."
Hermione looked over at Harry. He was holding the firebolt now, his fingers curled around the polished wood like it was something living, a part of him. "I think," Dumbledore added almost to himself, "that this year will be remembered for a very long time." As they left the office, they walked the rest of the way in comfortable silence, the firebolt slung over Harry's shoulder like a promise. Gryffindor Tower was quiet. Most trunks had already been hauled down to the carriages by house elves, leaving the common room and dormitories half emptied, with that strange end-of-term hollowness in the air. The scarlet drapes hung still in the breeze, and the golden evening light stretched long across the stone floor. Harry stood in his dormitory, carefully packing the last of his things. The firebolt lay neatly in its case, beside his trunk, and on his bed the photograph Hagrid had given him, of his parents, waving at him from the past, was tucked gently between spare robes. He paused for a moment, looking out the open window, where the sky glowed soft orange above the lake. Then, fluttering wings, an owl swooped in through the open window, scrabbling briefly before perching on the sill with surprising dignity. Harry blinked. It wasn't a school owl, this one was larger, dark feathered, and carried a letter tied in rough twine. Cautiously, Harry took it. His heart caught in his throat as he saw the name written in messy but familiar ink. To Harry. Harry sat down slowly on the edge of his bed and opened the envelope. A folded parchment lay inside, along with something else. A press feather, likely from Buckbeak, and a scrap of old map with a mountain trail sketched by hand. He began to read. "Harry, well, I made it. I've been flying most nights, sleeping in old barns and caves by day. Buckbeak's doing well. He prefers fish to anything else and still bites me if I try to steer too hard. Good bird. I wanted to write properly, not just on the run, and tell you, thank you. For believing me, for fighting for the truth. Your father would be proud. He is proud, wherever he's watching from. Also, there's something else I owe you an apology for. That firebolt? It was me. I sent it to you, anonymously, back at Christmas. I wanted to give you something worthy of your talent, and, I suppose, as a sort of godfatherly gesture. But I never meant to frighten you, or your friends. I realise now it must have been terrifying to receive something so suddenly, especially while the world still thought me a killer. I didn't include a note because I didn't want to scare you off. I thought, maybe, if you had something good, something joyful, it might help, even if I couldn't yet explain myself. So yes, the firebolt was a gift, an apology, and a promise that I'll always have your back, even if I'm doing it from the shadows. I'm sorry we can't be together yet. Too many eyes, too many whispers in the wrong ears. But I'll keep writing when I can, and when the time comes, I promise we'll make good on that talk of living together. Until then, stay out of trouble. Who am I kidding? Try to survive trouble. And take care of your friends. Especially Hermione. She's sharper than both of us combined, and you'll need her. Enclosed is a feather from our noble hippogriff friend, and a little trail I've flown a few times. If you ever want to find me, follow the mountains west. With all the affection a disreputable godfather can offer, Padfoot. Harry read the letter twice, then 3 times. He folded it carefully and placed it into the inside pocket of his jacket where it lay over his heart. Outside, a carriage bell rang. The train would be leaving soon. He looked around the room once more. The familiar beds, the creaky floorboard by Neville's trunk, the half-drawn curtains, and smiled faintly. Then he stood, slung his bag over his shoulder, and grabbed the firebolt case. Down the tower they went, the final golden light of 3rd year shining through the high windows. Whatever lay ahead, Harry knew this much now. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. And somewhere out there, in the wide, wild world, Sirius Black was flying free,